Hey everybody, John Mark here. Welcome to Mark My Words. Ladies and gentlemen, I have with me today a man that I call the Steve Jobs of right-wing thinking.
God.
That's a marketing phrase for you, Kurt. A man who is, in my opinion, but I'm completely serious about this, a man who is, in my opinion, the most important intellectual in the world today, and one of the most important, if not the most important thinkers of all time. And I know he would say he stands on the shoulders of giants, but he really does take the knowledge we've accumulated and the lessons we've learned and that we must learn from history and from all the science we have about humanity today, and he ties it all together with a nice bow on top. He's really teaching us how to more fully appreciate the good things we've had and the good things we've done in America and Western civilization, and then he's teaching us how to defend those good things better, and at the same time how to cast aside some of the mistakes we've made and do a better job of defending against those mistakes so that we don't make them again, and just how to take our society to another level and more effectively defend that which we value as grassroots right-wingers. So he's a person that I'm so glad we have on our team at this crisis point in our history. And before I came across him, I understood that we had problems, but I did not really know how to solve them. But after I dove into this man's material, I realized it is possible to solve our problems in such a way that our descendants don't have to go through this again, or at least there's far lower risk of it. And that is absolutely priceless. Just briefly on his professional background, he was a technological principal in 2 legal research firms and then built and sold a number of companies in the Seattle area. He describes himself as someone who reads a lot. That will be quite obvious when you listen to him. And he says he is probably a very good CEO, but that what he's doing now in regards to his intellectual work is far more important than that, and I would completely agree. I would say the world needs this man right now. We, the grassroots right, need him and his insights right now. He is the founder of the Propertarian Institute, which you can find at propertarianism.com. And you can support the Institute on Patreon. If you search for the Propertarian Institute, you'll find it. And I would strongly encourage you to do so because I believe that what this man is doing is, and I mean this without any exaggeration, the most important work in the world right now. And in my experience, he's also just a very real, down-to-earth person who genuinely wants to do everything he can to save our nation, our people, and our civilization from destruction at the hands of our enemies and set up our descendants for a much better situation. So, Kurt Doolittle, welcome. Thank you for what you are doing. Thank you for being here, and it's a great pleasure to have you here today.
God, I'm like so flattered. I don't know what to. People accuse me of being arrogant, but it's actually posturing. Now I'm kind of humbled. I might be speechless, which never happens. Anyway, thanks for having me on, John, and I want to shoot back. Thank you for your work. I was going to start out with, yeah, John, thank you for your work. But now I don't think I can do it justice. Anyway, so what are we going to do today?
So we are going to, hopefully some of my previous videos on propertarianism have given people kind of the 101 level of propertarianism, some of the basics, and we'll probably touch on some of those again today. But my hope for this interview is that we can kind of take the audience to the next level of understanding. And we were talking beforehand, you said that some of the questions I had for you really touch on some of the central issues, and so that's really good. That's what I want. So hopefully we can add a lot of value for the audience today. And so again, I would just mention to the audience, if you have not watched my previous videos on propertarianism or my previous video to this, where it's just some interview excerpts of interviews that I've done that we talk over some of the basics, that will be very helpful to you as well. But I think you'll get a lot out of this also. So I have 2 goals for this interview, Kurt, and that is to just keep painting a clear and more complete picture for the audience of what better law and better government can look like. And then number 2, to provide a deeper level of understanding around why Western civilization has been so uniquely successful, what our secret sauce is, so to speak, and then why what's happening to us is happening to us. Where have we gone wrong? And where have we failed to defend our secret sauce, and then how can we do a better job of defending it with better rule of law, better governmental design? And this is where I think your work adds such great value. So,
better thinking. If you understand what happened in the 20th century to our people, it will make you angry. I got so angry for about 2 years. It was really hard time. And I would expect that our people need to be angry. And they should be angry about it. But anyway, I think I want to prefix with something that I said just before we got on, is that, if there's really the philosophy, which is the plumbing, right?
Yes.
And that's this plumbing I worked on in public for a long time. And, I'm really rigorous and disciplined, and I work through all these problems. And then you get to the political solution, which is how to create the institutional framework for us. And then there's the policies. So the problem is over time is that, someone comes in and they come into the process I've been working on, because I'm working in public, and they see the philosophy or they see the politics, and they haven't really seen the policy, except what's important to, the plumbing is just work I have to do in order to calculate something. The solution to government sounds like it's as something we're going to cover, that it's actually that it's a big deal, but that's actually just a moral question for most of us. The practical question for most of us is the policy. And so there's really three topics here, and then the fourth one you bring up, which is why are we so successful? And everybody's sort of interested in one or more of those things, but the stuff that it's going to change our lives for the better and restore our civilization and make us stop hating each other is the policy. Anyway.
Yeah, that's great.
Anyway, so where are we going to start on this?
So let's start with parasitism. I know my viewers have heard me talk a lot about parasitism, and a big key is suppressing parasitism. And so one of the things I've noticed when I started communicating your work to people was people would say, well, it's a rule of law solution. That's not really going to work because our rule of law is so bad and we're just terrible. And it's like conservatives tend to think of government as like this big evil blob, and that's all it is. When really the reality is people are coming to America and Western civilization. They're literally risking their lives to get in here for a reason. And that's because we actually have really good institutions in many ways compared to most places on earth. And so I heard you on a previous interview from a while back. One time you went through a list of different types of parasitism, or like a spectrum of parasitism. And you pointed out that Western civilization has actually done a pretty good job of suppressing a lot of these forms of parasitism. And then you pointed out kind of where we've gone wrong. And so I was wondering if you could run through that for us a little bit. Just take us through some of the types of parasitism, and then let us know where we've gone wrong, where we've failed as far as suppressing certain forms of parasitism.
Well, I think there's two questions that precede that. Why don't we like parasitism? And I'm going to lose my train of thought, okay? Because I'm going to have to go down some rabbit holes. So you might have to draw me back to the question in a second.
No problem.
All right? The first is that we all want reciprocity interpersonally, but politically we want proportionality. And that's when we say, when Socrates, Aristotle, and Plato Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle couldn't solve the question of what's justice. That's the question. Is that we want reciprocity in every action we take, but politically we want it to work within the limits of proportionality. And what that means is I don't want a defect. Does that make sense? Proportionality, when you break proportionality, it's when we start to have conflict because we're defecting. And that's when people say you want relative equality. Well, what they mean is they don't want disproportionality.
Yes.
And right, so what's happening is because of our failures in the 20th century, which they're numerous, we are in an era of disproportionality. And this is making everyone angry on all sides, specifically because we are not only being reciprocal, but the government is forcing us to be irreciprocal, and it's making us angry. And we are, because the government is forcing us to be irreciprocal, we're living in a world where we're experiencing disproportionality. So everybody's kind of angry about this. Well, at least the left and the right are, which is incredible.
Now, is my understanding correct, Kurt, that one of the things I felt like I learned from you that was very important was it's not capitalism versus socialism. Like a lot of times capitalism gets blamed for this lack of equality, right? People see that some people are so rich, right? A small percentage of people have so much of the wealth. Now, it's my understanding that due to Pareto's law, basically, that's going to be that's inevitable to some extent, but what I learned from you is I don't care if a rich person is rich. I care if they are violating reciprocity against the rest of the polity.
Correct. And so this is one of those beautiful little lies the left invented, which is capitalism versus socialism. Capitalism means rule of law, and socialism means arbitrary rule by human discretion. Rule of law versus rule by discretion. The problem is we don't practice capitalism, which every libertarian will tell you, except that a libertarian wants to be a Rothbardian instead of a rule of law person. Now, technically speaking, a fascist is a rule of law person. Is that he says you can't do anything in commerce that consumes the commons. In other words, that's what you can't do. But what we are doing today all over the place is we are allowing commercial profit at the cost of commons. And so this is what's making the left angry, right? The right is angry because one of the commons that's being consumed is the intergenerational family and the preference for policy in it. So this is what's happening there. I lost my train of thought.
Quick example while you get your train of thought there, Kurt. Quick example of that. All of us on the grassroots right are well aware now of how these big corporations just want immigration. They just want warm bodies from anywhere. They don't care about the crime rate. They don't care if these people demonize white people. They don't care about anything because they live in their gated communities and it's beneficial for their bottom line.
Well, let's be more forgiving. You're not. I mean, people who work in companies. If you're a CEO, and I've been one most of my life, you're trying to feed the machine. Yes. You have all these people around you that are dependent on you feeding this machine. And, people think, there are Apples and Microsofts in the world, but the truth is your local grocery store works on a 1% margin. Your local convenience store works on a 0.5% margin. And most of your, if you're lucky in small business, you might make 20% if you're lucky. If you're in a medium-sized business, you might be lucky and make 12%. If you're in a really big business, you're lucky if you make 6 or 7%. And it works like that. And sure, there's outliers. Apple and Google and Facebook are the outliers right now because they're basically, if you understand what their business model is, it's gambling. So you play on these great big fields, but the reality is that the rate of inflation is somewhere between 1% and 3%, and if you can't beat the rate of inflation, you're losing money.
Yes.
So the problem is people have no idea. I mean, the average person says, "Oh, if I was in charge, I'd do this." It's because they have the same concept. They think about their pocketbooks, right? Yep. And they think that the company works by that model, or the nation works by it at the the national economy, or the global economy works like that. Actually, it's really hard to make a buck. Yeah. If you're a CEO, it's a 20-hour a day, 365-day a year job, and the reason you go play golf is because you'll have a nervous breakdown from working and thinking that hard. So the problem is we have set this system up for that the use of credit, right, is making credit available to consumers so consumers can consume, so that businesses can keep feeding the beast. So it's this vicious cycle of credit, and the problem is we're not increasing productivity enough. So what's happening is, since we can't increase productivity enough, and we have this illusion of the possibility of constant growth, they're doing the stupidest thing possible, which is throwing bodies at the problem to create consumers in exchange instead of producing production. When there's no reason if we're doing all that, why don't we just bring LCD manufacturing, chip manufacturing, bring all the high tech manufacturing back to the country and back into the country and continue doing that process until we're back in control of high multiples of returns. People think, well, you're going to get a service job that's better. No, it isn't. A service job produces no multiple. If it costs you $8 an hour to deliver, $16 an hour worth of services at 2% margin, versus you put out a heavy equipment investment that produces 30 times returns. That's a way better business. So it's, the average person just doesn't have enough knowledge of. I mean, they did it on purpose, right? They don't teach money, finance, economics, and law in school on purpose so that you're a sucker, right? And that's what they've done to our people. I think that's why we have so many people who follow us who went outside the university system, is because they want the truth.
And they're just not being taught that stuff. And that's what a lot of people don't understand. I think what you pointed out is very important to understand. It's just incentives. The CEOs have a certain incentive. And as you said, they're feeding the machine. I don't think most of them are sitting there saying, I'm going to be evil. I'm going to screw over America. They're just saying,
I got to stay alive. I'm trying to stay alive.
Alive.
People are in power. People are in power because people give them power, right? Yeah. That's why you're in power. You're not in power because you have power. People give you power to exercise on their behalf. Yeah. That's what your employees do. That's what your investors do. That's what banks do. Frankly, that's what the government does, is you have power to work in other people's interests. And so you're sitting there trying to feed this beast, and you've got a management team around you. You've got layers of middle management. You've got financial information, and you only have a few percent to work with. Why? Because everybody in a company tries to maximize their out in it. And so what happens is everybody maximizes their take, and then there's no capital left over to adjust to shocks, and that's when we have corrections.
Exactly right. And so you've got all these people who are in power trying to feed different feed their own personal beasts, and just they have the incentive to keep feeding that beast no matter what the cost. And so then the job of rule of law, now we're back to reciprocity, is to make sure that they're doing this within the bounds of reciprocity, because otherwise there's all these incentives to be parasitic in one way, shape, or form upon the polity or whatever the case may be. And so the job of law is to make sure that they are only feeding the beast within the bounds of reciprocity and not being parasitic upon the polity. Would that
that's excellent, except that we're talking about the wrong people. Actually, if you look at the data, most millionaires are self-made from middle-class people, right? Most decamillionaires are. And so, if it's being an entrepreneur is by far the highest paying form of highest paying job you can have. It's more than twice any other job. The problem is you've got to be successful at it. It doesn't count all the people who fail when they say that. It's the same thing with businesses. We look at all these businesses, and we look at the businesses that survived the technology boom, and we don't remember, at least because I certainly do, how many of them failed. Yes. There were an infinite number of companies who failed during the tech boom. There's a few survivors, so we tend to look at these as well. These companies, it's just freaking lottery mostly.
Yeah.
So you were bringing up the point of law, and I was trying to go back to the problem. If you look at the and then you look at the personality profile of most CEOs, and their single trait they have, besides industrious, conscientiousness and industriousness, and they're very hardworking people generally, is that they tend to follow ethical standards. And that's why what we think of in Western civilization is our ethics. We have commercial ethics. We have commercial ethics because we invented commercial ethics. I mean, the Greeks did, really, the Romans did, but we invented it as a middle-class majority civilization. And we did it during the Middle Ages. So we've invented this middle-class ethic, and we've industrialized it till it's the mainstream ethic. And if you look at what ethics mean to us, it's a commercial commercial ethic. It's not a familial ethic or a tribal ethic or a theocratic ethic. It's a commercial ethic. And there's a reason why Christianity and our ethic go together so well. I mean, we Germanicized Christianity from a Semitic totalitarian religion on the scale of Islam into a Germanic folk religion of the Protestants that says you are virtuous through your works, and therefore you must work. Right? I mean, so we made this we made this this religion adapt to our middle class philosophy. It's the same thing with chivalry. Now, there was no chivalry in the medieval period. It was all invented. It's a literary fiction invented afterwards in order to give a moral narrative to the middle class. And so we live in this very ethical system. And so business people tend to be. It's the freaking financial, it's the talking, it's the finance, advertising, academy, and state complex that's parasitic. And so my primary problem is that we have a completely unnecessary financial system that is incredibly trillions and trillions of dollars taken out of our people, which results in their population collapse. And so the primary problem here, which I can solve the problem of government. It's actually not a problem. Solving the problem of law was fairly hard, but it's a technical problem. The problem that makes our people suffer is primarily that we have this ridiculous financial burden. We have this ridiculous lack of consumer protection, and we have this ridiculous redistribution of taxes from productive middle class people with middle class ethics to unproductive people with underclass ethics. And so look at we all tend to humans are simple creatures. We're really good with one-dimensional lever, right? But when you start saying, okay, I've got 6 axes of causality here, what do I have to change in order to affect the average person? The answer is that we've consumed we added women to the workforce. Well, you added the women to the workforce. What you did is you took the greatest possible consumer in the human population, women, who are willing to pay pink taxes on everything, and you throw them into hyper-consumption. Of course, that's going to do it. On the other hand, every dollar they've contributed to the workforce has been consumed by taxation to redistribute those working class women's offspring to people from the underclass who don't produce. So it's not. If you want to talk about suicidal policy, a lot of care. It's like same thing. It's true in business. You can't profit from consumption of commons. Well, you can't care at the cost of consuming the commons. And that's what we're doing. We're caring for people at the cost of the commons. And I think one of the reasons we do that is because we didn't understand the problem of genetic regression to the mean. And that's that you have to keep defeating the Red Queen through controlling your reproduction, as we have in the West, they have in the Far East. You have to do it. You can't stop, because if you ever stop, it's like the mouse wheel slows down. What do you call it? The gerbil wheel slows down, the hamster wheel, and you genetically decline again. And that's what's happening.
Yes. That's a great rundown of the problem, and so I think it might be good to actually go.
I just threw you off. I threw your whole freaking story off.
No, it's actually good because you touched on a lot of. It's completely fine because you touched on a lot of. You kind of gave us a good overview there of what the problem is. Basically, our challenge is to stop the bankers, the financial class, etc., from profiting at the expense of the commons, at the expense of the people, and then the leftist, the redistributionist people from profiting at the expense of the commons as well. Because if we let them profit in that way, it is dysgenic. In other words, the lower IQ people have their birth rates artificially boosted. And it's the exact opposite of what we want to do as a civilization.
Basically, I want to add something there.
Go for it.
Because we'll get jumped on for the IQ thing. Success is dependent mostly on personality. In other words, you can be successful in this world if you have an 85 IQ, but you have conscientiousness. In other words, you have prefrontal cortex functioning. You can be a scumbag with 190 IQ.
Yes.
right? If you have deficient prefrontal cortex, right? I mean, you can't control yourself. It's the same thing for sociopaths, right? You can have a highly functional sociopath that's extremely valuable to society. Why? Because he's just acting in his interest in everybody else. It's just easier. I mean, in other words, sociopaths are a great essay on why ethics works. Everybody's just happier, everything works better, and everybody wins. So you don't actually have to be, you don't have to have all these emotional drivers driving you. It's just a rational incentive. The problem you get is if you get a person who's angry and got trauma, and he's trying to pay the debt of that trauma. I've been teaching this to a group of psychologists. They just love it. I talk about it in debt terms. And that sociopath comes along and now he's just pissed at everybody. Well, he's pissed at the fact that he's pissed at everybody and has no inhibitions. That's the problem, right? Why is he pissed at everybody? Well, because he was traumatized. Well, it's the same thing. I mean, it's the same thing across the board with everything. If you have an intelligence, IQ, you have a intelligence, and you have taught yourself discipline, or you have you're genetically disciplined, you're going to do great no matter what. I mean, I always say people like, you and me and the kind of guys who follow us, we're just going to be successful if you throw us on a desert island. It doesn't make any difference, right? Yeah. But for a lot of people, they don't have those resources. So what they need to focus on is, well, I need to actually focus on my character and not be so concerned about my intelligence, because I can succeed in any quintile, right, of the population. It doesn't matter if I'm an ethical person of good character and discipline. Well, it's kind of hard to teach yourself discipline. I'm sorry, it really is. Turns out it looks like mental illness isn't curable through therapy or mental illness, like biological mental illness, isn't curable through therapy or medication. That looks like that's coming to a dead end. But trauma is, and training is. So we can cure both of those. We can cure education. We can educate you. We can correct trauma, and you can learn discipline. So those are all available to you. So you can achieve at any place in the sector as long as you want to work at it. And this is the real issue. People don't want to.
Yes, and that's a great thing to bring out, because when we talk about IQ, there's two different things. If you talk about individuals, which is what you're talking about, Kurt, there's kind of a different thing that people need to understand about IQ at the individual level, which you gave us a good rundown of. Then at the group level, we get into, for example, Dr. Garrett Jones' book, The Hive Mind, where he talks about how the average IQ of the people around you in your polity, in your nation, actually matters more than your own personal IQ.
It does. This is the issue, is that we're declining. I just saw we're at 98 now, and or 97. 97, and people don't understand. This is like a cliff effect, right? It's not like it's a linear decline. It's like once you get below 97, it starts crashing. So you crash between 97 and 92 is a crash, and below 92 you're living in the third world, and you can't fix it. It's like I brought up on a talk show the other night. I can't remember who I was talking to. Maybe it was JF, and I said, look, I got this guys. I have a lot of followers in West Africa for a bunch of reasons. It's just a couple of guys there got into my stuff and they spread it. Right. And this guy calls me up and he's frustrated. He's like, I want to do this and this. I'm like, dude, it's not you. Right. Yes. There's nothing wrong with you. There's no way to get capital to you in the demographic distribution you have, because that demographic distribution is creating demand for a government that prevents capital from getting to you. Yes. And so this is the issue, is that people need the commons that they need for their abilities. And so if we built a middle-class civilization over the past couple of thousand years, through kind and unkind means combined, and we did it, and it's eugenic. Let's just face it, we've practiced soft eugenics for at least 4,000 years. Yes. And we accelerated it really rapidly after 700, which is under bipartisan minorialism. So above the Hajna line, which is the Protestant sector, I mean, we basically exterminated. We basically pushed middle class genetics down into every class. And so when we were here in America, we're immigrating people who are they're biologically middle class, and we immigrated biological middle-class people who are living subsistence lifestyles as farmers because there's no economic velocity sufficient to consume their talents. So they come over here, and we did really, really good. We ended up with a Dutch financial class, a English, my answer, English political and legal class and craftsman class, and a German farming class. I mean, you want to talk about ideal combination of forces. I mean, you had the Celtic, the black, the Scotch Irish down there into the south, we call them Black Irish, Scotch Irish. You had those in the south, and you've got your perfect warriors, and all of a sudden you've got the optimum combination of European people fulfilling their roles because of their demographic and geographic history. So we had a wonderful lottery. We got a brand new piece of territory that smallpox decimated. Not that the Indians weren't killing each other at every freaking opportunity. I was like, dude, no, you don't understand. I know this because my family was the first household attacked in the French and in the Indian Wars, right here in Wallingford. So they had a fortified house, and but why were the Indians fighting against white people? They were fighting against white people because they wanted to control who had access to white people's markets. In other words, it was an internecine battle. They were killing each other for this, and eventually escalated.
Yeah.
So if I showed favoritism to your tribe, you're going to try to kill me off, so your tribe can have another channel through your favorite channel to the European market. So anyway, go ahead. Go ahead. So we had this wonderful windfall and we built this entire economy with those people. It worked really well until, frankly, we succeeded in absorbing the Irish. We didn't succeed in absorbing the Italians. And it doesn't look like we've done very well with any of the Catholics, honestly. And certainly once we got into the Eastern European, Western European Jews they were freaking Presbyterians by the time the First World War comes around. It was working fine, especially in the South. Jews were fully integrated in the South. We brought in these Eastern European Jews, and it was in the post-war period, it was a freaking catastrophe. And then we brought in the black community instead of they were doing fine at developing a middle class. Right, and we did the Johnson program to imitate the Soviets. Well, it's the difference. The Soviets were talking about ethnic Russians, right, and who with their agrarian tradition, and they've been what they are for forever, and they have a certain temperament. And we tried to do the same thing with the African American or the black population, and it was a catastrophe because the difference in pro-sociality between those two groups is just enough to cause that difference. I don't want to. Yeah. I'm sorry. I'm
it's really good, Kirk, because what you're doing is you're really taking a nail and a hammer. It's kind of like the final blow here to this nice little wishful thinking dream that we've had in the West, which is the aristocracy of everyone, that everybody's the same. All these people groups are basically interchangeable, identical widgets, or they are capable of being that. We've seen that in our foreign policy. We're trying to put democracy on people groups that have not developed the way Western Europeans developed. And so it's very, very important for the entire grassroots right wing to understand that white people of Western European descent are unique in certain ways.
We're the weird ones.
We're the weird ones. And we do what all people do, which is we think everybody else is like us or can be like us, and they are not. And you see it manifest.
They don't vote that way. They don't live that way. They don't vote that way. They don't use language that way. They don't write books that way. They don't publish scientific papers that way. They don't argue cases in court that way. They don't marry that way. They don't train their children that way. It's really obvious who was a German, Celt, and Anglo immigrant in America still, right? We can tell those things.
By the voting patterns.
You can tell it by voting patterns, by religious patterns, by speech patterns. You can by family moral differences, by differences in manners. You can tell it by everything. So why would you think that if we are as a group of people who've built a middle class civilization, and why would you think we could bring people in here who are, and they're not going to be way more different than we are? different from each other.
Yeah.
Well, they are. And so what you see we built America as a third way. Instead of the state, the authoritarian state, or the authoritarian, in other words, the authoritarian state by force, the authoritarian church, we built the third way, which is the middle class emerged, and America was the opportunity for the middle class to flee the old world competition between the military martial aristocracy and the church nobility, which is how they tend to talk about it in the past. Because the way it worked is if you're like I have an ancestor who gave up all his property to go to the church. Well, why? Because he was like the fifth son and there's no land left. Right. And so you're a wealthy person, you go join the church, which is like basically it's like buying your way into Apple.
Yeah.
Right. Because the church was just a big corporation. Yeah. And so you bought your way into the corporation and then you got a job. Well, then other people in society bought their way into church roles, like not the priests, but the bishops. So you bought your way into church government. You paid your way in, and so you had the aristocracy, the military aristocracy, and the church nobility, and you had the underclass. Well, we slowly restored the Carolingians. Excuse me. Trying to keep my language decent. The Carolingians failed, and so it took us a long time to rebuild commerce and in Europe after the fall of the Roman Empire and the conquest of the Roman of trade by the Muslim world. And so it took us a long time, and we built this entire middle-class civilization on our peninsula, mostly around the North Sea, and we did a really great job of it, and we created this eugenic thing. We came over to the Americas, over to Canada, and we built this middle-class society, and we do it under a situation where we have the economic windfall of conquering a freaking continent. Actually two. Yeah. 3, North America, South America, and Australia. And we conquered 3 freaking continents. And so you say, well, what's the end? Well, you just sell it off to immigrants, right? Well, it's one thing to sell it off to middle class who underutilized middle class immigrants. And it's another thing to sell it to people who are dependent immigrants. Well, the left has had this strategy since the 60s. When they realized Marxism failed, they went to population replacement. So they taxed and worked women out of, they copied the Soviets, taxed and worked women out of reproduction, and they immigrated underclasses. And then they destroyed the family. And so they think about this they pitch this to people in the same kind of terms the Christians pitched life after death, as if there's some savior from the physical reality of human beings cooperating in the physical universe to produce enough calories and time to keep each other alive. And there isn't any game here. I mean, you either have a middle class society or you don't. And I think our people's attitude is, well, you can have whatever society you want, but we're not going to play that game with you.
Yeah.
I mean, and if you won't separate voluntarily, then we're going to have to kill you. I mean, that's really what it's coming down to. They're forcing us into this position.
Well, we've seen this movie before as well. I mean, there's a market for communism. There are willing ears to hear what the left is selling because it is, as you say, it's kind of this promise of escape from having to add value. It's a promise of escaping. It's
actually a promise from relief from social status. Yes. Because remember, that's our first method of accounting. Consumption is just a way of increasing our social status. Because really, you can live on rice and beans if you're about. I mean, look at Afghanistan. I always use that example. It's a freaking hellhole over there. It's terrible. But I mean, if you have rice, beans, you can sell heroin and run around in a pickup truck shooting other guys instead of playing football. It's a great life. So think of it. The point I'm trying to make there is that family bond, having something to do with other people is what makes you feel your status. Yeah. And so you want to have membership in a clan, so to speak. Well, we all want this in different ways. We may want the illusion to ourselves. We want it to our family members. We want to have it to the broader population. So whatever radius you want this status, but what the underclass wants is they don't want to be at the bottom rung because that's what all animals rebel against.
Well, it really struck me when you put some notes down earlier. One of the reasons that localizing polity, having more local polities, smaller polities, and not having this massive globalist everything is that people don't feel so distant from power.
The power distance. It's called power distance. Yes. So if you're in a small polity, all right, I mean, I noticed this when my dad was in local politics. It's just like this hierarchy. There's always, I'm not anonymous.
Yes.
Right. If you're in a, I mean, I think it was 10,000 people in our town. I think the village I live in right now with my mother has got like 3,000 people in it, maybe. I'm in the middle of nowhere. I grew up in a town with maybe 10,000 people, and we're talking about a really large territory of farms, right? And so there's no power distance. You can know the cops.
Yes.
Right. You can know them.
Yes.
You can know the mayor.
Yes.
Right. And so then when you have one of the values of representatives is you used to be able to know your representative.
Mm-hmm.
They spend so much time in Washington now you can't. Yes. But you used to be able to know them, and they're powerless. So the real answer is what we want is that power that's in Washington. Mm-hmm. We want to decrease the power distance between Washington and ourselves, so that the people that live in these, multicultural urban centers where they're really divided into neighborhoods, right? They call it multicultural, it's really not. It's just neighborhoods, mm-hmm. right? And so you have a polity that's a dense polity with neighborhoods, and we have the ability to move between neighborhoods like Europeans can move between states, right? Yes. Or Americans can move between the North, the South, and the Midwest, and the West. So it's all the same basic idea. And we like the availability of those differences because we want to the knowledge that there's different common goods and services and products produced increases our choice. So we like that.
Yes. Yeah, and that competition between commons as well is where if there's a place that's producing better commons, more people are going to want to go there. They're going to be more economically successful.
So all we're talking about is we all want a limited power distance, but we live in different densities. And because we live in different densities, opportunity costs vary greatly. So if the opportunity cost for a rural person to meet another person is very high, the opportunity cost for a person living in Manhattan is you're trying to make people ignore you, actually. I mean, that's the whole trick is don't make eye contact, don't say hi, smile. Whereas you do that what you do in a small town, like the small town I grew up in, is you say hi to everybody because they're going to remember you, right? Yes. They know you. There's value in that.
Yes.
And so, it's the reason I like Eastern Europe is because it's still more in that way of people are still pro-social. So, but it's not, that isn't to say one thing is good or another. The same thing is good, but the distance between us, the power distance between us and the geographic distance between us generate different demands for the commons and the institutions and the commons those institutions produce. And so the problem is that you have people in I consider New York a shithole now. I mean, I used to when I went there as a kid, it was pretty cool, in the 60s. And it was only starting to go bad then. It got really bad in the 70s, which people don't remember anymore because we had that whole correction after the liberal program failed. And so, it's a shithole now. It's just a noisy, dirty, smelly place that there's a few nice spots in it, but because there's so much so low opportunity cost, anything you want is nearby, and there's no social cost. Whereas if you live in a low density population, there's a social cost of trust with every interaction. And so the costs are very different, and so we want more normative demands and lower density to reduce the social costs, and you want lower normative demands in the urban area because you have near zero social interaction costs. So the economics of the social behavior is different. I'm probably losing you now, but so we need the ability to produce our own commons at our own power distance, and the only way to do that is to end the dominance of cities over territories and convert cities into city-states and let territories and suburban and rural territories govern themselves independent of the city-states.
Yeah, let's talk about that because we ended up here. It's a good place in the conversation to to flesh that out maybe a little bit more, one of the questions I had for you was, after some kind of a shakeout in America, because we know this is not going to last the way it is, after that, what would be your recommendation or one of the better options, let's put it that way, for what we should do, what we could aim for in the United States of America? You just kind of outlined it there as far as devolving a lot of the power of the federal government to the states, making things more localized, making some of the larger cities into city-states you were talking about. Can you flesh it out any more for us there?
Sure. I mean, I'll just tell the narrative is a pretty simple story. Is that, like I said, we conquered this continent. We broke it into colonies. We turned those into states. We federated them because no state was strong enough to defend itself against what then was, I mean, America today to the world is what European countries were to the world, right? So yes. European countries used to be the warmongering people that were getting in everyone's business in order to expand trade and to make the world conform to their model. Well, the British Empire collapsed. America took over the British Empire, and since the end of the Second World War, we've played the role of the British colonies, which is forcing everybody into the world commercial system against their will, although for their benefit, I might add. And so what happened though is when we are in the 1800s, we had taken the original 13 colonies, and all of a sudden got the opportunity because of conflicts in Europe to basically buy up or take the rest of the North American continent, buy or conquer the rest of the American, settle, buy or conquer the rest of the American continent. And I think about four or five major transactions. The most obvious one is the Louisiana Purchase. Yeah. And so what happened was, though, is that you had an industrial North that wanted to finance and supply that, and you had an agrarian South that was trading with the world. Does that make sense? You had you had an agrarian South that was selling resources to the world farms, and they had an industrial North and financial North that wanted to sell and settle the West. So if you look at and everybody hates this conversation, but I'm sorry. If you look at the early stuff in the pre-Civil War, it's nothing to do with slavery, really. It's about the fact that the North and South are actually different nations, and they have different economic and political interests, yes. And that the North does not want the South to take over. And the reason it will take over is because the rest of the country would be agrarian, and those agrarians would expand slavery into them. And this would mean that the South would then dominate the North politically on the continent. Yes. So that's the actual reason for the conflict, and this reason the South takes the initiative is because they know that the North is bigger, more powerful, and wealthier than they are, and that if they don't take Sumter, they're not going to be able to hold them off. And so what's happened then is that solidified the means of conquering and selling off the continent. Well, we've conquered and sold off the continent. Yes. And now we're not selling it off. We're actually fighting over who's going to control the federal government. The same way we're fighting over who's going to control the continent in the past. So my solution is pretty simple, really. It's that devolve the federal government into what the church or the British Empire had done, which is an insurer of last resort, which takes care of the treasury. Treasury is the wrong word, but the exchange, foreign exchange, but we'll call it the treasury function, the military, and the military function. And this way we preserve the original intent of the federal government, and then we devolve the non-insurer of last resort. In other words, we evolve anything that doesn't involve a conflict between states, we devolve it back to the states as originally intended. Except that this doesn't fix the problem, because we don't live in a world that is 10% cities and 90% rural anymore. We have vast underclass cities that are basically plantations. They're tax plantations, right? Yes. There's no difference between a southern slave plantation where you're under the dominant control of the slave owner and the tax slavery. I mean, that you're tax and legal slavery that you're under in these big cities, except that you have a broader degree of choice because of the current status of our economy. So the current wealth civilization is brought about. So my view is take any city that's over 300,000 people and convert it into a city-state, and then you have counties left over, and the counties already have existing governments, and then any district within that county that wants to secede to a neighboring county does. We have all these institutions in place.
Mm-hmm.
The general complaint if you're in the federal government is, well, you say the talent is not the talent at the state level isn't very good. Well, I mean, that's because the power at the state level isn't very good.
Yes.
If you take the power and restore it to the state level, the people that are sucking our country out of money that live within 100 miles of DC, they'll redistribute to the states, and we'll have a competition between states for the production of commons, as well as goods and services, and as well as polities, and we'll return it to the what was so successful in European history, which is the competition between states for the production of excellence in a competition for population. Mm. And so I don't think this is a particularly difficult concept. We already had we had this structure. We had it in Europe for most of our history, mm-hmm. Where the church was actually was a federal judiciary that was very weak. Right? Except that what happened under the church is the church's leadership, if they desanctioned you as a ruler, it meant that all your neighbors could come take your shit. Mm. Right, and so that's what happened. So your threat of losing of ostracization by the church, the monarchy, means that you were delegitimized. Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, this is a very poor way of doing things compared to the way we do things today. But the idea is still that's what made us have all these wonderfully competitive polities. I mean, we did before the unification of Germany. People have forgotten all this, but until the middle 1800s, Germany was over 300 microstates. And that's where the second scientific revolution was happening. Mm. And so that's what we want to have back. We want all those microstates. The problem is, in a world where you're fighting against the Chinese and the rebirth of the Muslim empire, is that you need to have combined military forces. Mm. And frankly, Europe is done, right? If we withdraw from Europe is a bunch of little Germanic countries on the edge of a continent dominated by Asians, East Asians, and Russians. Mm-hmm. Right, and yes. So they're all left alone. So I'm like, are we going to abandon all our people? No. The reason you have to preserve that military is that most of the rest of my policy is around how this process actually works. And how we would what each state, because states are now we can make states easily formed, and you can make states easily form and reform this way. States can go bankrupt under my model, which they need to right now. Mm-hmm. A lot of states yes. need to go bankrupt. Yes. And so we'll have this universal treasury, but we won't have the ability for anybody to seize power in the federal government in order to alter the family, the traditions, norms, values, and group strategy of the individual polities, which is what we had in Europe. I mean, the Austrians were very different from the Irish, and the Poles are very different from the Spanish. Well, actually, I should say Italians. Yes. So, and that's what makes it good is you have all these competing things. Yep. What the left wants, what the Jewish, Christian, Muslim world wants, is and what the left wants, because they're part of the Jewish cousin, they're the same, is they want a religion, and they want equality because they don't want that competition. The problem is they say that, but then their choice is to fight us over it, and I'd be happy, really. I keep saying this. I'm happy if they fight us over it because I know we'll win. Yes. But I prefer that we just settle this amicably. We not have 100 million people disappear through many of them who are not leftists. And so instead, I'd prefer we ended the we finished off the Jewish century as a combination of failures at every single level, and just like the French century, the German century, and the Russian century was a failure at all levels, and we return to what made modernity possible, which is the Aristotelian, aristocratic, and British solution, which is rule of law, and that's the end of the entry into what really fixes the underlying problem. I think I made this in my notes to you.
Yes.
Is the underlying problem that people think of is its government. I'm over there talking to poor Ukrainians, and they hear all this democracy crap, right? And it has nothing to do. What makes you prosperous, makes the West prosperous, what makes America prosperous is rule of law.
Yes.
Moreover, the Anglo system is permissive rule of law. That means you can do anything unless it imposes a cost on someone else, and then you have to fight it out in court. Whereas in the British, so we have the most innovative economy, the most innovative people for a reason. Why? There's no failure in going bankrupt. Hell, if you're a CEO, you haven't gone bankrupt twice. You just haven't tried anything hard enough, right? I mean, bankruptcy is really, lender beware. Right? I mean, you invested in some returns on this person. They didn't do it. So we have this incredibly fault-tolerant economy and polity and legal system. But it's because of our legal system. If you go to the European system, they use the continental system. The continental system is regulatory. In other words, it says what you can do. You can only do what you can do. It's impermissive. So why do you wonder why there's no entrepreneurship in Europe?
It's because they're saying you can only do this and this and this and this, whereas in America we're saying you can't do X, Y, Z, but anything else you can do.
Yeah, if we haven't discovered that it causes an act of parasitism between people, then it's open. Yes. And if you end up inventing a new way of parasitism, we're going to find that in the law, and we're going to punish you. Yes. So don't do it. Yes. But it's basically be an ethical person in business.
Yes.
Then you have cartelling. Right now, Google, Facebook, and Twitter are acting as an information cartel. And so you've had people try to produce cartels in oil, the Standard Oil Company. Yes. You've had people try to do it with silver. In the I don't know if you're probably not old enough to remember that in the 80s. I think it was the 70s or 80s. Might have been might have been the 70s. I'm getting old. So anyway,
so how do you fix that? You just break them up? Facebook, Google?
Well, the problem is that, like I said, the secret is not the government. The government is just a means by which you organize the production of commons. So It doesn't matter if you have a monarchy or if you have a bureaucracy or if you have direct democracy. You can produce this by whatever means you choose. What matters is rule of law. Yes. In other words, what is the constraint? Now, in current theory, jurisprudence theory, there is a spectrum, which is people like me who says, well, law is strictly constructed. You can do whatever you want, but you have to do it through acts of reciprocity. Then you have the permissive view, which is that these are rights, and we can do whatever is articulated as rights. Right? This is where we start to go bad. Right? Yes. Rights are either constructed from reciprocity, or they're not rights; they're just shit you made up. Right? Then you have the Democratic group. This is where the left begins to get ridiculous, and they say, "Well, if it was through the democratic process, then it's law." No, if it doesn't start out as reciprocity, turn into a right derived from reciprocity, and that right isn't defended, then you can't make shit up. You have to find a way to do it through acts of reciprocity. Now, I always take Mothers Against Drunk Driving. That was a great initiative. Moms got together and let's make this happen. Well, they did. They made it happen. Did it get legislated? No, they made it happen. That was civic order. And so then you have the group this is where the pure leftists are. So law is just politics. Whatever anybody encodes in law is what it is, and it's purely political. In other words, it's a means of organizing, commanding, and controlling an economy. So where I am on one end, I am in the permissive, which is you can do anything that's not irreciprocal. right?
Yes.
And that's what the American system was set up to do, to give opportunity for the middle class to build a middle class civilization.
Yes.
And you have the other end, which is the left, which is if we don't, not only it doesn't matter what you all folks want. It's purely political. We're solving political wars by command. And so law is just an excuse for saying you're a socialist tyrannist.
Yes.
In other words, they don't have law in China. They call it law, but it's not law. They never had law. They had command.
Yes.
And commands come down. Now, because of the wonder, I mean, really, if you study Confucius, you realize the freaking guy almost had it, and if he probably was smart enough to figure out he had it, but that he couldn't get there in his civilization. So having failed to solve the problem of politics, he went for harmony. Well, he basically made the family structure as the entire structure of the polity, where the paternal father, the emperor, on down, it's just a big family, and we always do what's right for the family. Well, that isn't too bad a way of doing it, but it's not law, and it's also why they calcified. So they had they had the most running start of all of us, but they ended up not being able to make the jump because they had too little. They didn't give people freedom, and now you have ant people over there. Right. Well, we're the opposite end of the spectrum. We're permissive. We're like Vikings or raiders or whatever. A pirate is an entrepreneur, right? He's just a pirate off of shipping lanes, and a Viking is a pirate off of land, right? Landed resources, and a raider is a landed pirate off of landed resources, right? So it's the same thing, but it's all an entrepreneurial business. But armies under the control of government are not. So we have this beautiful third way that we invented, which brought about modernity. And it was brought about modernity because of our law. Yes. Our law is Anglo-Saxon, is British, Anglo-Saxon, Germanic customary law, Indo-European customary, Western Indo-European customary. We don't have any record anymore of what the Iranic and Indo-Iranian branches did with their law. But in the West, we maintained this purely entrepreneurial legal system where there's no one in charge all the way up until the American Revolution and into the present. And every state's fought us, just like the entire world is still fighting us. Well, let's stop trying to bring it to the world. If they want to come here, fine. We know what we'll do. We'll come to you and we'll rule there just fine, because it's just rule of law. You want to fix, we said this to Ukraine. You want to fix Ukraine? Go to America. We have one freaking lawyer for every 300 people. Take 10,000 or 20,000 of them, bring them over to Ukraine, hire a translator from every one of them, and you'll instantaneously have rule of law.
Yes. And this is such a massively important point that you're touching on here. And this is one of the main things I wanted to get across in this is it's rule of law. What we think of as government does a couple different things. We have rule of law, which is, as you say, what it should be doing is just enforcing reciprocity. That's it. Yep. But now we have obviously judges that are going beyond that. And then the other thing government does is has representatives of the people negotiating trades. Negotiating how to create commons. Yep. And so I want to tie a couple things together that Kurt has said, because this is all goes back to the Constitution you're writing as well, Kurt, which builds on the original. But one of the things it does, as you outlined earlier, is we have this interesting dynamic where there's value in scale for our military, right? We don't want to have a military that's only just each tiny little place has its own military because it's not strong enough. But at the same time, what really makes people happy is these smaller polities where there's less power distance. So as you were talking, I could see that what you're laying out in the Constitution there combines those two factors in an effective way. And then another thing that your Constitution is doing is what you were just talking about, which is it's stopping the government and the judges from having the ability to do arbitrary rule, which is what the left wants them to do. And it's making it so the judiciary, the rule of law, does what rule of law is supposed to do, which is enforce reciprocity. And it's then allowing the representatives to do what they're supposed to do, which is negotiate and do trades on how we build commons together, but without violating reciprocity. And so
Yep.
it's very, very powerful what you're doing there. And I think this is a very important concept for people to understand the difference between what we would call via negativa law and via positiva negotiating on commons. And so just to really briefly outline those words, via negativa means, and you can correct me if I say anything incorrect here, Kurt, via negativa, via negativa means what you can't do. It's what you were just talking about. We say you can't do X, Y, Z. It's like a referee on a soccer field.
It's false and irreciprocal.
What's false and irreciprocal?
It can't be false or irreciprocal, because technically falsehood is a violation of irreciprocity.
Yes.
But I try to get that across there because otherwise you don't get speech as well as action.
Very good. Yes. So the analogy I use is it's like a referee on a soccer field. You can run whatever play you want on that soccer field within the boundaries of the soccer field. But as soon as you kick the ball out of bounds, the ref is going to say no, penalize you. Or as soon as you kick the other player in the shin without touching the ball, sorry, you can't do that. And so it allows a lot of freedom for people to be entrepreneurs and start new things. That's why America is the engine of innovation that it is, because of what you just explained, Kurt, because that's what our law in many ways is like. But where we've gone wrong is we're allowing representatives of the people who should just be negotiating on commons within the boundaries of reciprocity. We've allowed them to pass laws that violate reciprocity because we've replaced our rule of law in many ways with just voting. Whatever you can vote in.
Right. We've moved from rule of law to mob rule on one hand, yes. And mob rule is legitimizing authoritarian rule. So we've moved from rule of law to not even the rights we had, but arbitrary rights. In other words, you can't have a via positiva right. You can only have a via negativa right. In other words, you can only have a right to someone not doing something to you, right? You can't have a right that forces someone to do it to you because now you've imposed upon them.
That's so what that can't be right. Do. You should do this. You must do that because of our moral instinct.
All right, and so anyway, I interrupted you.
Nope, that's great. So what we've lost sight of, I think, on the Grassroots Right is that our civilization has already done a very good job of a lot of this via negativa law in many ways. I started out asking you about a list of different types of parasitism that most of those we've suppressed really, really well, whereas most third world countries have not. If you start out from murder and you go up to theft, and then you go up to more sophisticated types of parasitism, like the financial parasitism we have right now, the bankers doing what they do, different things like this.
Well, let me run with something here.
Go for it.
Let me run with something. So, for example, why do we have juries? We invented the jury 5,000 years ago or something like that, and we've been using it forever. And you use a little jury for certain things, a bigger jury for more things. And we used to have juries of 100 people. And when you got to Parliament size, Parliament was originally a jury. In other words, the government wanted to do something, and he had to get the approval of the jury. In other words, to the Parliament in order to fix it. Well, the middle class sees it away. Now I'm going to lose my train of thought here. So the reason juries are valuable is because you can't bribe everybody in a jury. And if the more important the issue, the more people you want in the jury to make it more impossible for there to be corruption. So that's the value of juries. The value of juries is the truth is that you because of a variety of human cognitive biases, turns out we're right. Juries are right a lot. They're not right when they're asked to do the wrong thing, and judges do that. But they're right. So the same thing has to do with the government structure. Right now, you can go to Congress, and you only have to get X number of senators and representatives to work with some incentive in order to affect this entire country, which is it's the biggest economy per capita there is. Now, conversely, what happens if a same organization has to go to 100 states or 300 states to have that same level of corruption? What happens is you have competition against that. So you can't bribe the jury. So you get rid of the ease of which politicians can be bought because you're increasing the size of the jury. In other words, you have to go up to a lot. And it's the same reason it's so hard to pass a freaking constitutional amendment is you got to get 50 states on board, or not 50, but 2/3 of those states, which is freaking impossible. Which is what the whole point was. It was supposed to be impossible.
Yes.
And it's the same reason we have the electoral college is that it makes it now you've made it so that even the states can't get together and screw with each other. In other words, you can't conspire people in different states. You have to actually get a majority of the states. So, and originally when our senators were appointed by the states instead of directly elected, which was that was a disaster.
Yes.
When the senators were directly appointed by the governors, or the governments of the states, you had states defending themselves on state grounds instead of people joining parties at the national level trying to dominate other states.
Yes.
So there is this human desire to have this big herd, but that's because that I actually believe that, from what I understand, the desire of ordinary people to have this uniform herd, is because power distance between them and their ability to construct commons for whatever their local needs and distribution is prohibited by the scale of the federal government. It's the same thing with Europeans. They're getting pissed off because of the European project. Well, there's things that you can unify under and things you don't. There's no need for Europeans to unify under anything other than military and monetary policy.
Yes.
There's no need for that. And every time they do, they try to make a United States of Europe. They're just destroying the beauty of Western civilization, which is we want as many princedoms again as possible. We want to reverse the nation state era or the imperial era and return to what's the competition between polities that leads to such excellences that, and the same way that you want to say, I want to live in a city with diversity, so I have these neighborhoods. Well, we all want to live in a polity that has the same thing, so let's just recreate the United States of America, except with a lot more states, and let's let Europe create the European model, except let's use the judiciary as the church instead of one that's made of supranational nonsense.
Localizing, especially social policy, because different groups have different needs, different desires, and then you produce that competition, as you said as well, which is great because it becomes very obvious. Okay, this place is doing things well, it's having good results, versus this place is not, and people can choose, and there's winning and losing that way. As you said, states could go bankrupt if they do things badly. It restores accountability. A lot of people just feel that the federal government now has no accountability whatsoever, and that's part.
Well, it doesn't, because it can't. It's a scale problem. You can't do it because you can't. Aggregates only work at small levels, right? You can aggregate like certain behavior within a family. You can aggregate certain things within a neighborhood. You can aggregate certain things in a village and town. Other things in a city. But at certain points, you start you're no longer making a trade. Right, people are no longer trading one thing, a benefit. There's just a bunch of people who benefit and a bunch of people who lose.
Yep.
And so that's what happens when you scale. And so the best thing to do is keep these polities fairly small, or small enough to have common interests, and then let them produce their own excellences, and then we can imitate the excellences we want. Yes. I want to live in somebody sent me a beautiful video of a school day in Ontario, Canada in 1923. I'm old enough that I remember when we had those desks from the 1920s with the inkwells in them. Because I went to Catholic school on weekends, and the Catholic schools had those old things from the 20s. Well, school education was pretty good back there, but for different reasons. It's not like so much what they taught them; it was how they taught them. And so, I look back at that and I'm like, I would want that. Well, there's plenty of people here who there's a certain demographic that basically needs to return to Prussian military education forms. In other words, you do this, you do this, you do this, you do this, we do this together. It's very much similar to the Asian form. There's other people that are better off in the Finnish form, right? And there's some of us who are better off in the sort of free-for-all form. So we need to be able to do that. Now, what needs to be common across those people is simply ethics of reciprocity, and the commons necessary to produce reciprocity and proportionality within every population is different. I mean, it's kind of unfair, honestly, to ask. I don't want to pick on any group, but I have to. Sorry, pick on African American males from 13 to 22. As if it's like entirely their fault. I mean, they mature. I mean,
they mature faster. Yeah,
they mature faster, and they don't have the. That's what neoteny does, right? That's why Western people and East Asian people are different. Is we're I don't want to say we're more developed, but we are. We're more domesticated, and so we mature more slowly.
Mm-hmm.
So and if you want to domesticate an animal, you just make it mature more slowly, and then you have more time for cognitive development and in less competition against instinct. Well, you have these young guys, and they have like the highest testosterone of any group on the planet, and they mature earlier. Mm-hmm. Well, we're just educating them in a forum that's not. If you watch what they do to each other in Africa, it's a much more pro-social environment with a lot more constraints by older males, and so that's just what they need, right? My kid goes to school with a bunch of Indians and East Asians, and they're cats, right? I mean, they don't. I'm afraid my kid's gonna. We were afraid my kid was gonna break one. I mean, because he's like me. He's like, there's very clear right and wrong, and if you're wrong, I'm going to punish you for it. And he's, and I'm like, and my kid's in the, 125th percentile on size back then, and so I'm like, he's going to get kicked out of school because some teacher doesn't realize that no, that behavior is inappropriate among our people, all right, and that's not going to last. And so I don't think we need to be trying to make uniform, equal people. We need to provide people with the education, training, especially mindfulness, because that's what's really causing everybody to be crazy, and skills according to their rates of development, which is why those mixed schools we used to have, instead of this Prussian segregated schools, which worked fine if you're all middle-class Germans, worked fine for us when we're all middle-class Germanics going to school. But if you look at how they used to run multi-grade schools, it was fantastic because you are pro-socializing everybody at the same time. You're not creating this prison environment where the kids are have nothing to imitate except each other, and it's all bad.
Yes, and this is extremely important. What you're touching on here, the neoteny or neoteny, however you pronounce it, different people groups in the world have different levels of neoteny. As you said, they develop more quickly or more slowly on average as people. So the highest neoteny is Northeast Asians, from what I understand. And then you have kind of white people, and then below that kind of everybody else. And so I think it's important, Kurt, for people like us, because hopefully people can get the vibe. We're not saying any of this out of hate. None of this is like a hate vibe or
no. It's make people happy. People aren't freaking happy.
Happy, yes.
People aren't happy. They're not happy because you can't make everyone in the world a highly neotonically advanced, fully domesticated, middle-class genetic European, and take that model and apply it to people who haven't gone through the same meat grinder as we have.
Yes.
It's the same thing. Tell people, why are Asians what they are? Asians don't pay the rural IQ tax, That's interesting. What that means is they've done a freaking replacement. Now, why? You want to know how hard it is to rice farm? You're up to your freaking shins in dirty water, muddy water, 360. You get like 5 days off a year.
Wow.
Right?
Yeah.
It's right. You want to know why they have this? They're completely situationally unaware, because what do you think that job requires? Now, I'm overstating it because whatever, but the
total concentration.
They're really good at that category of things. We're still hunters. I don't want to we have lower testosterone, but we're still cognitively hunter. We have big brains. The reason Chinese Han have their IQ distributions, they have big round heads too. You want a big round head is to fit as many neurons per kilogram is in your body as you can. It's like autistics. That's one of our advantages. and and so we're just different, and so I hate this idea that we have to all be taught raised the same way, when all it does is make us unhappy. What we want to be is socialized. We want to be taught a form of mindfulness. I don't like the monotheistic religions, which I'm adamant about. I would prefer we were taught it in a non-goofy way. I don't like even Buddhism so much, but hey, it works for women especially. So I would prefer we had an activist way, and I would prefer that we taught the Epicurean model values in the Stoic method of self-authoring, which I think is out there. The world is trying to recalculate the Stoic problem again, and I would prefer we all had mindfulness so that we could get there. I would prefer that we all learned sacredness, which is that I have no right of imposition of cost on anything around me, which is what you do. That's what church teaches you to do. Church teaches you the sacredness, which is I have no rights. One of the reasons we were developed Great Commons is we were able to take the I have no rights from the public venue of the church and extend it into the commons.
And I have no right to impose a cost on somebody.
Right. And so I don't have rights of expression, interference, whatever. I have to be silent and whatever. And so, this actually worked really well. It created an optimum environment for the restoration of trade. So in the West, we created markets and everything. We have association, production, reproduction, commons production, and polities. We created all these markets for everything, these voluntary markets, as long as you were self-sufficient. We had slaves back in the day because honestly people were, you're talking about a barely domesticated animal in most of our history. Undomesticated humans are not the jovial, kind things that the left would like us to pretend. They're purely rational actors, and they're immoral and moral as situation fits. We just create societies where morality is a preferable behavior because all the alternatives are worse.
Yep. And so this is a very important topic, folks, because this is something that we on the grassroots right wing, as I said before, we have to completely abandon this idea that everybody's equal. So as you can tell, we speak about these things scientifically. Everything Kurt is saying is from scientific data. This is not something he's just pulling out of his rear end. This is all.
I work from data. I work only from data.
Only from data. And so, but we speak about these things unapologetically, but you can also tell we speak of these things in love. We don't hate people, and yes, we are going to do what we need to do to protect our civilization and our people, whatever we need to do. But defending myself and my people does not mean I hate you. It means I'm defending myself and my people. Correct. And it's because I see a value in myself and my people. But I don't hate anybody. I just want everybody to be freaking happy so we get along. Correct. And so this is what differentiates most of the time a libertarian, those of us who are in the libertarian community from those who are in the hard right community, is they're so angry they're willing to impose on others. I just want everybody to be happy. My point is, though, if you don't want me to be happy too, and having what I want, I'm really happy to go to the hard right and make sure you don't have what you want. Yeah. And so this is the choice we're in. You can either let us have what we want, and we'll gracefully devolve into polities that suit our needs. In other words, with power distances that we prefer, with polities that we prefer, and we'll continue the big sort, and we'll restore the European project to the American continent, and end the neoliberal, Jewish and neoliberal project of one world. Which is just an extension of the monopoly of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, right? I mean, it's just that whole monopoly, that Semitic monopoly thing that they've had since somebody first figured out you could grow wheat on the shores of the Euphrates. I think I probably screwed that up, but anyway. They've had this monopoly thing because that's how they evolved. They have a much more feminine cognition than we do. We have a much more masculine cognition. I don't go into that. So we have this wonderful little world, right? And they want their monopoly of their herd, and I think it's because they don't have power.
In other words, they
Yes.
feel powerless.
Yes.
And so the only power vector they have is at the national level, and where they can use their numbers to alter it for everybody. And so I'm saying, okay, well, let's just agree to disagree.
Mm-hmm.
You want to live in dense urban areas with high social. You want to live in a plantation because you're cared for like a slave. We're happy for you to do that. However, we're not going to live in that plantation where we're cared for a slave, because we want to retain our original sovereignty, liberty, freedom via negativa law, and you can have your via positiva law.
Excellent way of summarizing it there. We don't hate those people. We understand those people, but we're not going to let them dictate to us and remove this great thing that we have, this, as you call it, a middle-class society that took us literally thousands of years to develop. We're not going to let it go in 1 or 2 generations and just slide down backwards to Brazil 2.0 or whatever it ends up being. You're not going to take us with you.
Well, the Jewish left and the Muslim world and the Jewish left, as we think about them as if they're separate, but they're not, right? It's just Judaism, Christianity, and Islam all have tried the same game, and to spread this disease around the world of submission, right? Which is a little bit. It's the female strategy. It's the female strategy. So they've tried to spread that around the world, and so it's not like they haven't tried this in a lot of countries. It's succeeded because you can especially in Islam, they can just go in and attack you when you're weak, which is what they do. And raiding, we think that warfare is conducted in the European model, but you have to fight someone on their model's terms, not yours. And so the Muslims basically raid you into failure, right? And that's what they do. That's what they're doing. That's what we call it, terrorism, but it's just raiding, right? We have this misunderstanding that of what it is. It's destroying your infrastructure, and the Jewish left and the Christian left destroy your social infrastructure. And so these two groups come in, and they've done this like the Christian destruction of the European world and the Muslim destruction of the every other world. And this is another repeat of the destruction of the great civilizations of the ancient world. They're just using this time they're using false promise of economic and social equality instead of false promise of life after death.
That's very important. Let's talk about Christianity for a second, because I think this is one of the most important subjects, and because we got a lot of Christians on the grassroots right wing, and I come from a Christian background, and as far as as people,
I'm a good Catholic boy.
As people, they're the most wonderful people many times that I've ever interacted with, and a lot of times somebody will say to me, Kurt said something negative about Christianity, and they kind of it triggers them because they're a Christian, and so but I've also heard you say many good things about Christianity. One of the things I've heard you say is that Christianity teaches, as far as the behaviors that it teaches the optimum strategy for the in-group. And then historically, I've heard you, even in this conversation, mention there's some bad effects that Christianity had in the past and some good effects. But really what I try to tell people is you're pinpointing something, and sometimes they'll say, how dare he equate Christianity with Islam and Judaism, because Christians think of themselves as very, very different from those, and in many ways it
because
is.
they don't understand what I'm criticizing.
Exactly. What are you criticizing exactly? It is the same thing the left does as well, and it's not all of them that do it, but many of them do it. So what exactly are you pinpointing there?
So when I talk about Christianity, I talk about it as Abrahamism, which is the use of pilpul and critique, right? Which is sophism and undermining, as a argumentative method, a persuasive method. This is what Judaism lives by. Christianity practices theology by, and Islam is completely buried in, so they're not even aware of what they're doing.
So let me pause you just for a second, Kurt. From a Christian background, I can tell you this. This is why there's so much disagreement among Christians, is because everybody's interpreting different Bible verses a different way, or they're cherry picking or whatever. This is what he's talking about when he says pilpul. You can make it say whatever you want if you really want to.
It's just like numerology with words. It's like numerology with words. Now, Jewish people it's just looking at every side. No, it isn't. It's searching for a way to overload someone's reason so that they are a sucker to your deceit. And so what I would say is, instead, I would like Christians to understand natural law and argue in natural law, because if you do, Christianity is just natural law.
Yes.
So I want you to argue Christianity and natural law, not theology.
And Kurt, I know the Bible well enough that I feel like I can construct an interpretation of a lot of these things in the Bible.
Sure you can. That
because matches up with natural law perfectly.
Right. So my problem is purely argumentative. And so when a Christian comes to me and he tells me some sophism, it pisses me off because I realize he's been fooled, right? And now he's a sucker for the left. Mm-hmm. Instead of saying Christianity is a way of teaching natural law, which is the 10 Commandments are just property rights. That's all they are. Yes. Right? Christianity is an innovation on Judaism, because what it says is follow these 5 rules. And these 5 rules are the optimum prisoner's dilemma. And what that means in normie speak is it's the optimum solution to producing cooperation and a polity. Mm-hmm. In other words, if you respect property rights and you practice the 5 rules of Christianity, which no Christian is going to agree with, unless you're, because they're too obvious. It's just extension of kinship, extension of familial love to the rest of the polity. In other words, exhaustive forgiveness. There are personal acts of charity and a few other things in there. But there's just, I won't go through the 5 rules right now. Sure. But the point is that it's just natural law. Mm. And so my point is, if you want to teach Christianity as Bible verses and explain them in natural law, I'm happy with it. If you want to believe Jesus is your savior and your model, that's a psychological device, and I'm going to support it. If you think our God is Jehovah, I'm going to crush that out of you every opportunity, because it's not. Our God is Deus Spaitar. And you can tell the difference between Jupiter, Zeus, and Deus Spaitar. That's our God.
So you don't mean that literally as in supernaturalism, though, right? You mean that as in...
I said, if you look at the origin of the God in Christianity, it's Deus Spaitar. It's Zeus. Zeus Pater, Jupiter, Sol Invictus, the vigilant, the eternal sun. We're not worshiping some freaking evil. I mean, the God in the Old Testament. This is why there was such a debate over to include. They needed to include the Old Testament because they wanted some more historical background for him. But that freaking the Jewish God is fucking evil. I mean, if you want to think of a devil, that's him. He's a horrible God. But if you look at the sun God, I mean, Christ is the sun God. It's that image that we have of Christ is is transferring the Jesus figure and commingling him with Sol Invictus, which is our traditional God. And so
both of those, though, are going back to what you said. If you have Jesus as your model, you're basically
you cannot be a better ordinary person than imitating Jesus. You cannot. It's not possible, right? Mm-hmm. And that's not a question of my moral judgment. That's just incredibly boring science and logic, right? It just can't work, and we have all the science to prove it. We have the legal records to prove it, and so I'm like, Christianity is a really good thing. Just don't argue your goddamn theology with me. Deliver unto. I work for Caesar. Right, and deliver under Caesar what is Caesar's, and that means reason. Deliver under God your faith. The problem is do you need to talk to me in this theological nonsense when the science says you're right in the first place?
Why do you even need all this other
Why do
stuff
you
to
need
argue
that
with
stuff?
somebody whose specialty is reason and law when what you're saying in the first place agrees with that anyway?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
just stop talking to me about faith. I mean, I don't need it, right? Because I know it's true. I don't need an exercise of faith to know that if I imitate Jesus in my daily life, and everybody else around me does too, I'm going to be better. Now, I don't have the need because I have a lot of agency because I got gifts, right? I have gifts I was born with, so I don't need to talk to feel like I need to search for a higher power to give up my frustrations to, right? I talk to my God all the time. I mean, I do every day. Everybody thinks, well, how can you be that? Because I understand what God is in scientific terms. But that is just me. I have that luxury because of my gifts. Not everyone does. And so other people need to talk to Jesus and talk to God, and they need to be able to give this up to the higher power. And the evidence is it works. And I know scientifically why it works. Doesn't matter. As a matter of fact, telling people scientifically how it works might actually be harmful to them. Deprive them of it. It doesn't matter. If you have your faith, you imitate Jesus, and you look at the Bible as, well, a set of parables for the natural law, and that if you're a Jeffersonian or like me, a deist, is that when you say God, you mean the natural universe, the laws of the natural universe. And then it's just which grammar do you want to talk about the truth in? Right? And so I'm not, everybody says I'm not anti-Christian. I'm happy to make Christianity the monopoly religion of Western civilization and persecute every other one out because I think every other one is freaking evil by comparison. The reason, though, is because I understand Christianity is reducible to the natural law and an improvement on it. In other words, property rights are natural law, but the improvement in Christianity, the innovation of Christianity, the reason why everybody gets wealthier under Christianity than they do under every other large polity. You can be parasitic and get wealthy. There's groups that do that, but you can be morally wealthy is because Christianity is the optimum group strategy.
Yes.
And that's it. It's the optimum strategy. We have optimum law. We have the optimum group strategy under Christianity. We have the optimum grammar, which is math, science, reason, and law. So we have the optimums here. And stop trying to give them away to people. Believe everybody else can hack it. And if our own Christian community can't deal with the transition from faith to reason, right? Then why do you think people that are not as evolved as we are, in other words, they have two factors. They have lower neoteny, and they have not succeeded in producing, in reducing the size of their underclasses so that they can have a middle class majority. Why do you think they're going to be able to do that like we are?
Yeah.
They're not.
And this is a very important topic for the grassroots right wing, particularly at this time in history, because we have a lot of Christians on the grassroots right wing. We have a lot of non-Christians on the grassroots right wing. And I sometimes see people from both sides trying to kind of shove their thing down the other side's throat. And so what I try to encourage people is don't do that. You're not going to force a Kurt Doolittle to believe it supernaturally in Jesus. It
doesn't mean I won't imitate him.
But it doesn't mean I won't imitate him. That's right. And then at the same time, the non-Christians, I don't think it is going to be very effective to just tell the Christians you shouldn't believe in Jesus. That's dumb. But rather, let's find the point of commonality, which is the optimum strategy.
It's right. It doesn't matter what's in your head. It matters what you say in the political context and what you do. Yes. And so if you behave as a Christian, you're following it. If don't bring theology to the courtroom, don't bring it to economics and politics, because these are matters of compromise, not matters of monopoly. So I can't tell you. It's like deliver under God. What is God? Deliver under Caesar. What is Caesar's? I do law. My job is
Yes.
to resolve differences between people who use different grammars because they have different abilities and different sensibilities by which to perceive the world. I'm autistic, of course I'm going to see. I mean, people don't realize this, but autistic people are better at understanding of macro behavior. This actually came out in a great piece of research. Like, we're better at we can't empathize with the person, but we can observe the aggregate behavior because we can't empathize with the person. So autistic people are better at observation of aggregate behavior than ordinary people are. And so, I have this particular ability. It's actually a more emotional burdensome not to have faith. In other words, it's harder on you to not have faith. It's easier on you to have faith. I don't want to deprive people of that. I just don't want them to argue theology with me in matters that are not matters of faith and psychology. They're matters of action.
Yes, and I think that's great the way you said it, where let's render unto Caesar what is Caesar's. Like even Jesus said, right, pay your taxes. And obviously we know that the tax burden needs to be reduced in many ways, but you get the point. And so let's, one of the things I tell Christians too, I had a guy email me recently, like, Kurt has such a great thing. This propritarianism thing is so great. He has so many solutions, so many great answers. But then he says something about Christianity that I don't like. And it's like, why can't we just have a Christian, person in charge of all this stuff? Well, my answer is, when in recent history have you ever had a true Christian in charge of your polity? I mean, Donald Trump's not a real Christian, yet 80% of evangelicals vote.
The founder of our polity is Jefferson. Read the Jefferson Bible.
He took all the supernatural stuff out.
He took it all. He treats Jesus as a philosopher, like I do. I put Jesus in this. Okay, my foundation, my prophet is Aristotle. Right? Because Aristotle did what I did. He wrote the Athenian Constitution. And what he learned from that is what I learned from writing this one, is that you learn painful truths. And so what I see Jesus doing is an innovation that no one had understood before. And that is that the constantly bearing the cost of tolerance will eventually buy the loyalty of the opposition. In other words, this is what Christianity says. Love thy neighbor. And what it basically means is don't get pissed about petty things. Forgive them. Because the more we forgive each other, the more advantageous we become to each other. It's really tedious, but in the end, look up how Prisoner's Dilemmas games works, exhaustive forgiveness always wins. And so that's what we want. The problem is we can't exhaustively forgive the people who are using your forgiveness as a way to destroy you.
Correct.
And this is what Christians are doing. Get mad, get pissed. If it's not, if it's not our people, they're the enemy. This is what the church decided. The Catholic Church decided fairly recently, over the past 20 years, that it's going to double down on mysticism, and it's going to become the church of the poor people. Because only the poor and ignorant people seem to want to follow the church. What they could have done is said, we need to break the church, like we did under Protestantism, into multiple doctrines. The doctrine of the natural law, the doctrine of the mythology, and the doctrine of the faith. And we need to be able to teach all three of those levels. They could have done something along that order. What they didn't is they defected on Western civilization. So the Catholic Church become our enemy. And so, the Pope right now is definitely the enemy of Western civilization. Yep. He's absolutely positively an anti-Pope. And so, I look at it as, well, it's up to us to fix Christianity. Because people have been asking me to do this. It's one of the first things they asked me to do. I'm like, dude, that's a big freaking problem. Religion is the hard problem in social science. And I'd love to take over the church and fix that. But the problem is Christians want their Christianity as it is. Okay, well, I cannot change that. We cannot change that. At least there's no evidence of it. But we see that the people are bifurcating. They're either going to devout Christianity or they're abandoning it. And so what I want to do is I want to talk in both languages. I want to talk in the language of the natural law I would say people who are secular Christians, and I want to teach the and I want to leave supernatural Christians, theological Christians, to their own devices. I mean, if I would listen, I can't remember who that woman is. I listen to her once in a while just to understand. As you see some of these Protestant preachers up there, they fill an auditorium with people, and all they're doing is self-help.
Yes.
And I'm like, I can't criticize as one woman. She's really
Joyce
popular.
Meyer.
Is that what it is? She's like, God damn, she's good.
My wife credits her with getting her through a very, very difficult portion of her life. It basically just teaches.
You know, I didn't know you were married. I didn't know you were married until just now. I didn't know you were married. Like, people don't think. I don't have any idea who you are. Now I found out that you're married.
Now you know I'm married. But my wife is awesome, but she really. But you're exactly right. You listen to Joyce Meyer. She's teaching basically Stoicism. You can only control what you can control. It's good advice.
It's good. And so I'm like, dude, if that's the way Christianity can go, dude, I am pushing it, because not everybody can be me. And this is a problem smart people have. We vastly underestimate the differences between us. Right? Yes. And this is a really big problem on the left, because they're more solipsistic. Right? Mm-hmm. Right? And so and so I look at it as like I watch what where the Protestant church is going, and it's going. You know, it really is. It's Christianity being taught as Stoicism, right? And Stoicism being taught under the auspices of Christianity, and it's freaking brilliant. It's actually where the Stoics were going. Mm. And actually, I would rather they went with the Epicurean sort of outcome, which is the more peaceful. But sure, I'm all for it, and so I love that direction. But if you want to say, are we going to go back to scriptural dogma? It's not going to happen. The church will die.
Yeah. Exactly. We're not going to be. The Christians are not going to be able to shove their scriptural thing down the throats of people who don't believe in it, and vice versa. But there's so much compatibility, and as I always say, the grassroots right wing is, as far as I can tell, pretty close to 100% united on the things we want to stop.
I got to get over. Remember, so this is a problem, right? When I want to understand something, I attack it. Right. This is part of my methodology. Yes. It's falsification method. And so in order to understand Christianity, or like any other religion, just like I had to understand law, I attack things, and I try to destroy every one of my assumptions or anybody else's until I see what's left. Mm. All right. And so the problem is, I do my work in public. And I use the public as my classroom, as my rats in the lab, honestly. And everybody knows this. And so the problem is, when I was working on the church, it pissed a lot of people off. But in the end, my conclusion is, well, you can't. I mean, Christians aren't going to change. And as a matter of fact, I don't think it's wanted to. And the answer is, every one of us uses a grammar, right? There's a theological grammar. There's a moralistic grammar. There's a practical grammar. And there's a scientific grammar. On top of that, and so we all tell stories in the means of calculation that's available to us. Yes. Now, and so some people need empathetic, what do you call it? Anthropocentric. I'm thinking of. They need things that are human, and a human expression and human feelings in order to understand and internalize them. Mm. Now that doesn't work for me. You know, I can't do that. I don't have it. So I have to have stuff up here in the science and math category before I can feel it, right? Mm. But there's people who have to feel things in the moral sense, in the community sense, right? Yeah. There's people who have to feel it in the sort of vernacular sense, which is the way college people talk, right? Right, college professors talk in this sort of rational prose, and there's some of us who have to see it in the scientific prose. But these are just grammars. They're means of grammar is an internally consistent means of calculating, transforming inputs into outputs. Right, it's a way of expressing the world. We don't think of language as mathematics, or mathematics as a language, but they all are. These are just languages with different permissible content in order so that we can form associations with it in whatever brain structure we have. So we all have this spectrum available to us, and so we need to get off of the fact that we need everybody else to understand the world the way we do, and instead say we have Christians, moralists, rationalists, scientists, and And the common thread in there is Western property. It was Western reciprocity and Christian high trust.
Yes.
Right? I mean, that's what we need to. That's our common thread.
Yes.
And so we have. Once you understand that you simply say our law has to facilitate that, and our law facilitates the demand for high trust.
Yes.
So our open law facilitates demand for exhaustive forgiveness in the Christian faith. So I it's like I'm sort of cursed now because my research program gave me this reputation of being anti-Christian. I'm not. I'm anti-Abrahamist, which is a method of using a deceitful, dishonest sophistry to justify your position. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm just against that because I understand what it's done. It's the way that our people have been undermined. It's how Christians and women were suckered. It's how the working class was suckered. It's how the underclass was suckered. And all it does is empower these dictators who don't want to destroy Christianity.
Yes.
Right? I don't want to destroy Christianity. They do. I want to restore rule of law. They don't. They want a monopoly so they're in power and at their whim they can impose it on us. That's what the goal is. Mm-hmm. And they want to justify that by importing a lot of people who aren't middle class, genetically middle class that is. They want to bring them in there who will vote them into power so they can extract money from good moral Christian people, right? Yes. Whether secular Christian or devout Christian. And they want to extract that and destroy our rates of reproduction, which is what they're doing.
Yep. So
I understand that this is not. I understand the evil that this is, but I also understand that even the people who are doing it, they're animals, right? They're animals following a herd instinct, and they don't even know what they're doing. Some of them do, obviously.
Yeah. And when it comes to Christians, when I hear you say that, in my mind, it's a minority of Christians that actually are really bad on this, where they're saying things like, "Well, Jesus loves everybody, so we need to let in, 5 million." Underclass people from wherever because Jesus loves everybody. In my mind, I don't see most Christians doing that. Where I see a lot of Christians, maybe the majority, kind of falling into a little bit of this is it's just the old, the same thing we're dealing with everybody, not just Christians, which is everybody's equal. Let's encourage legal immigration because, well, they came in legally.
No, they can't. They're going to destroy you. The reason they're letting those legal and illegal immigrants in is to destroy you. That's all their purpose is in order to get power to destroy you. If the evidence of your rates of reproduction isn't and the rates of immorality in the public isn't enough to understand that they're repeating what they did in the ancient world, they're repeating it again by the same script, and they're out to destroy you, your religion, your families, your genome, and your civilization. That's what they're doing, and we're either going to stop them or they're going to win.
Yep. And if you look at what they're doing, if you're a Christian, I mean, they're trying now to outlaw anybody speaking out against LGBT, anybody, if they get complete power, they will basically make it impossible to be a Christian. They will do the same type of persecution, etc.
Well, they're making it impossible for guys like me to talk. I mean, what is undesirable about what I'm saying except you can't lie?
Yeah.
I mean, that's what I'm saying. You can't lie and you can't cheat and you can't steal. That's what I'm saying. Yep. But that's everything I say is reducible to you can't lie, you can't cheat, and you can't steal.
Yep.
I mean, so the reason and the problem is everybody's cheating a little bit. Everybody's lying, cheating, and stealing a little bit. So that every liar and cheater and stealer under the current system wants to preserve his means of lying, cheating, and stealing.
Yep.
All right,
so this is great, Kurt. I don't know where we are time-wise. I haven't been looking.
I don't care. I think we should keep going.
This is great. One thing I want to make sure to touch on, and this is kind of switching gears here, but I want to make sure to touch on some of the policies, because as you said, that's where people are going to really feel this, coming home in their lives. And so 3 areas of policy that I know your Constitution touches on is education, especially higher education as well, which has now just become basically a den of leftism, propaganda factory, and then the financial realm. And then it's an interesting way you say it is to center law around the family rather than just the individual. So maybe we can
center policy.
Yeah, policy. Maybe we can touch briefly on those 3 policies, just give a glimpse of how you handle those. Maybe we can start with education. How would you fix higher education? What does your Constitution lay out there?
Well, first of all, think of it. how many products are that expensive that aren't warranted? There's no warranty on your education.
Yeah, they don't guarantee that you're going to get a certain result from it in any way.
No,
Shape, or form.
and you know what the evidence is? It doesn't do anything. So here's
now, is that non-STEM only, Kurt, or is that when you say it doesn't do anything? Is it just these garbage degrees?
There are things your brain is not ready to learn, right? Until you're 18 or 17, 18.
Okay.
We probably can push it back to. You can probably push most college material down into high school. We can probably get people through calculus in high school. You know, some things just require an awful lot. I mean, the question is engineering, chemistry, physics. I just wonder if we can push that down much farther. We might be able to, but you can't get most of it there. But let's take that off. So what's the question? Is how would we get? How do we fix it? I lost my train of where I wanted to approach this was, okay, what's warranty? Okay, so your education is going to cost you, what, $100,000 now? Something like that?
Yeah.
Right? So at least, right? Now, instead of that, if you didn't pay that $100,000, okay, if I forget the ball mall effect, remember to go to the ball mall.
Okay, I'll remind you.
Because that's the part I got to get to. So if you buy a house, you should be able to buy a house for about $160,000. There's a variety of reasons why you can't, but that's what a house should cost about right now. There are parts of the country where you can buy a house for $160,000 without problem. There are parts where you can buy it for $250,000. If you go to Bellevue, where I've been living, it's freaking, when I had a house on the lake, which was like $140,000. I think the same houses are millions now.
Wow.
Right? That's just because of the Microsoft effect. Okay, so there's an unwarranted problem, and so they sell a good that does not appear to make any difference in your abilities. Mm-hmm. Teaches you things that are actually not of market value. Mm-hmm. And is arguably the school you get into from high school is more important than anything you study.
Yes.
And the product that you're sold isn't warranted. And the vast majority of what at least women study is not reproducible science.
Correct.
So there's a couple of things here. The last one is the number of hard degrees issues has been constant since about 1963. Does that make sense?
Yes, but in other words, all the growth has been in these non-hard sciences.
They're in nonsense.
Yes.
So all right. So this is $100,000. Now, what does a kid cost? Well, I mean, now you're out in the world and you can't buy a house. You have to pay off a house, mm-hmm. right? The equivalent of buying an education. It costs you to pay off a house before you can have a kid. You've delayed your earning capacity by at least 4 years, yes. right? So whatever that earning capacity was, and so that's lost. And you have actually not learned anything. You've just given up your early childbearing years.
Yes.
So worse, what's happened is you've delayed status consumption. This is something I think I'm the only one who talks about this one. You've delayed signals consumption during your prime signal era, which is from 13 to 24 or something like that. In other words, your most fertile period.
Especially as a woman, you're saying.
Right. Well, I mean, as a guy too. I mean, a guy wants a car. It turns out that yes, you get more ass if you have a car. All the stuff that we think is true, they said now it is. Oh, it's all true.
So you've delayed everything for 4 years because you're doing this. Yep.
No, you've done worse.
Yes.
Most of what we get in high school is crap. You could be working part-time through high school, right? Or you could at least be apprenticing there, right? Mm-hmm. You could have some consumption where you could signal. So you're not. So what's happening is you're being desocialized. You're losing time in the workforce so you could develop a skill. You're building up consumption, want for consumption. You get out in the workplace, you're in debt, you want to consume, and you not only can't you buy a house, can't afford kids, you're paying off a debt that didn't do anything except one thing, which is make it easier for someone to hire you because you're sortable.
They just use it as a sorting mechanism.
It's just a sorting mechanism.
Skill thing, even really.
It's not a skill thing. It means you're sortable.
It's a very expensive sorting method. Very expensive for the person that's doing it.
Right. Now, this isn't true if you're in the upper 10% of people. About if a college education requires, 115 at minimum, and probably 122 really.
IQ you're talking about.
Yeah. Then we should be doing what they're, we should be putting between 10 and 15, maybe 20% of the people through higher education at most. And the rest of them can be taught almost everything they're taught by the time they're either 18 or by the time they have 1 to 2 years of part-time study in a work program.
Yes.
Right now, here's the problem. What's called you think of it. This is really easy. And so this is where you're good. If you don't hate the financial industry, if you don't hate the scam that is the education and finance system right now, when I'm done with this story, if I do a pretty good job, you're not paying attention. You want to burn. You're going to want to burn every educational education, and you want to burn every banker, or hang every banker. And the reason is this. So here's something I've been telling people for a long time: is if you go into San Francisco right now, what does a shitty little house cost you? You've got to make
$1,000,000.
Yeah, you have to have 200-300K incomes right now to buy a house in San Francisco. Well, so the point I want to make with that is because of all increases in income are eventually absorbed by housing prices, and the only people who make money are the people who had the house before, at a lower stage while there's in the growth stage.
Wow.
Right? That's who makes all the money.
Yes.
Then the banker makes all the money.
Yes.
But it didn't turn into a good. What happened though is that the company has to raise its prices or its revenue in order to pay for the cost of employees in that density during that time, right? And so the leftist solution is to build Asian style rabbit warrens so that we can all be close to the Apples and Facebooks of the world, which is the absolute worst possible answer to everything. The Canadians, I love Canadians, like, well, we can't build like America does because we can't afford the infrastructure. I'm like, you pay the devil one way or the other, buddy. It doesn't work. You're going to get consequences of rabbit warrens, which is what they have in Asia, or you're going to get the consequences of territorial infrastructure costs. I can tell you right now that you may not think so, but you want the territorial infrastructure costs because they are not behavioral. They're purely a matter of credit. When you put people in density, you get the problem of behavior in people in density, which is they stop. They no longer shows the sacredness of the commons. They no longer respect private property, and they readily vote in power authority because they generate demand for it. So anyway, if you understand that all increases in wages are eventually consumed by housing prices, and you understand that the difference between people at different income levels is merely the consumption of car, vacation, and housing prices. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
There's no difference in the consumption of people above like $60,000 now. There's not very much difference. Once you make about $60,000, it's just can I get in a neighborhood with less bad people in it?
Yes.
Can I get a neighborhood with more white people in it? Yes. Can I get in a neighborhood with better schools because there's more white people paying more taxes?
Yes.
Can I have a better car that can signal that I'm to other people that my status, and can I buy a slightly more expensive brand of clothing? I mean, I'm an asshole. I wear nothing but Nordstrom, LL Bean, and Ralph Lauren, right? I'm a dick.
But it's signaling, yes.
It's signaling, right? I mean, but could I buy, honestly, what's the difference between my $300 pair of jeans and the 27 ones at Walmart?
Not
there isn't
that
fucking
much.
any. so and so it's all signaling. So what we do is all we buy signals.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And so what we create is a signal race. It's like an arms race between the US and the Soviet Union. We create a signal race.
Mm.
So that's what our economy is sort of built on. Sell people, bring in people, sell them a signal race into bigger houses. Now, what does this affect? This is interesting. How are you going to tie this to education? Well, okay, so here's the deal: is that there's this basically, if you bring a high income company into town and it pays high wages, it drives up everything.
Yes,
it drives up the cost of every freaking thing in that company. All right. So now let's talk about what happens with education. You've just what happens with education is instead of paying a small number of people a lot more, we burden a lot of people with an education that does nothing, and we drive up all prices.
Hmm.
Those prices are converted to debt.
You're talking about education prices specifically?
Education prices, house prices, car price, everything. All these signal prices are, we drive up all the costs of everything. So what happens now is that we drive, because employees need to buy goods at a certain level, we drive businesses, especially that serve the middle and lower with lower multiples, we drive them out of the economy and into lower wage differences. So, I mean, what's the difference in the cost of production in the United States versus Vietnam? Well, it's wages. But why? Because of these effects.
Mm.
So who's capturing all that difference and increase? The financial sector.
The bankers.
Well, so how many trillions are being extracted of the trillions we produce in this economy, right? Over every year, how many trillions are being extracted from our people and fed to the financial and global class, that very global class that's trying to destroy you.
Yes. To
destroy your middle class, your Western civilization, your white culture, your military tradition that is the origin of our the origin of our laws, actually our military tradition. And so you're trying to destroy this stuff. And so these people are destroying it. So I say to you, well, okay, here's what I want to do. I want to have the university. Does that picture clear enough, John? Are people going to?
I think it makes perfect sense. It makes a lot of sense of what's going on.
Okay, so let's take a different issue here. Let's make the university carry the debt. In other words, no more student loans. The university can borrow from the government to pay for your education, and you can pay the university back. Restore bankruptcy, and only give them so many years, like any loan, only so many years to pay it back.
So the school takes out the loan instead of the student.
Right. Now, what happens now to what they're willing to go? Well, do you know how many women take social service, or they take some variation of how to be a mom?
Yes.
And get paid for it. And how many women take these gut courses or psychology? That's my favorite.
It's got to be in the millions.
So sociology, psychology, two the greatest pseudosciences, and then the worst thing we can do is social work. I mean, it's a fucking catastrophe. When it's like one of those things where you raise your kid. If your kid's bad at 13, it's because you lost him at 4.
Yes.
If you have social work, it's because you lost him in kindergarten. You lost them in kindergarten because your education system didn't train them.
Yes.
See, we think it's just teach it. No, we're animals. We need to be trained. And so we didn't take. So the reason we have social work is we failed them.
Yes.
Then we take our schools, we fill them with people who are basically the bottom 16% of the graduating class. That's what we make our teachers out of. They have no life experience and they teach propaganda.
Yep.
Well, what if we took all these people who were retiring at 55 because they've made enough money, and they were teaching? You know how hard it is to teach how to do a curriculum to a teacher, especially if they, it's a summer course.
They can do it, no problem.
The reason is because teaching is a talent, not a skill. Right? The only skill you need is basically developing curriculum is basically project management for education.
Yes.
You can take it like a project management course. It's not freaking difficult. The rest of it's whether you're a decent human being or not. And so we put these young people teaching our kids. These young people have no life experience. They don't know what's true or false, and they teach this dogma.
Yes.
Well, let's do the opposite. Let's flip it around where it's people who have wisdom about the world. Let's get grandparents to teach children, and then we'll have people teaching them the real things, not this propaganda. The second thing is to privatize it again, which is the same thing I want to do to college. I mean, it used to be that the way you and I would make a college, in Oxford, for example, we would go together, we'd rent a building, and we'd call it Oxford College, and we'd bring a bunch of other smart guys, and we get paid directly by the students.
Yes.
Where does the money go in a university today? It goes to the administration.
The administrators.
It doesn't go to the teachers. I mean,
5 diversity officers.
Yes, it's ridiculous. So, well, it's because we failed at kindergarten, right? It's because we don't have adults going to college. We have people who have been infantilized because they weren't. That's like a grumpy old man, but I'm not. I mean, it's just like, well, I just want people to be freaking happy. You can't be happy if you're incompetent to function in the world.
No, I think every grassroots right-winger is absolutely on board with what you're saying. We got to do it much better from a young age, have better quality teachers, and then I love your solution for the higher education. This would basically gut this entire propaganda factory of pseudoscience, which higher education has become.
Well, I didn't get to the best.
Oh, yeah. You want to keep going on that a little bit?
Yeah, well, no, I want you to summarize, but I want to get to the best part.
Okay, so quickly to summarize, if you make the school pay back the loan, and that school cannot pay back the loan unless that school has actually increased the earning power of the student, then all the incentive goes away to have all these garbage degrees because they can't afford to have the garbage degrees because they're not actually helping the student increase their earning power.
Right. Secondly, in other words, we need to have fewer people go to college.
Yes,
because they're not actually going to college.
Yes,
they're basically they're taking a 4-year vacation where they can have sex, get high, and drink. All right, and that, which is fine, but and I realize that the sex, drink, and party field, a socialized field, is denser in college, and you kind of miss that afterwards. I guarantee it. Well, what do you think Bill Gates built Microsoft as? He built it as a set of dorm rooms for a reason. Because you can walk around. You could walk around, and at least when I was there, you could walk around in bare feet in your underwear, and nobody would complain. But anyway, it's not that we shouldn't have further education. It's just that there's no reason to create these incredible debt systems because they're actually just increasing the cost of everything and driving the economy down. And they're doing it. They're advancing the worst possible sectors in our economy. They're teaching a pseudoscientific religion to people of the impossible. They're putting them in debt. They're decreasing their rates of reproduction, and they're delaying. They're reducing their lifetime earning capacity, and they're putting employers in a position where they can filter you out based on whether you were stupid enough to go into debt. And so anyway, what college does teach you is something we could teach in high school, which is manners. And so we used to have, finishing schools and stuff like that. But it used to also teach manners in school. The problem is when you have a whole multicultural society and you're teaching certain people manners, they go home and they teach their parents those manners, and their parents don't like that. Or they see it as becoming white, right? Well, let me tell you, it's not that those manners are white. It's that they're middle class. White people are middle class, right? That's the difference. So you want to learn middle class manners if you want to join the middle class. If you don't, if you want to stay poor, don't learn middle-class manners. Don't learn how to articulate your speech. Don't learn how to speak in complete sentence. Don't learn how to enunciate correctly. Don't learn how to stand, how to shake hands, how to keep your mouth shut at the right times, instead of impulsively expressing yourself for attention at all times. So anyway, so let's go back to so the other part is, remember that the major innovation in proprietarianism that applies to law is, sure, it's the strict construction, the grammars and whatever, but it's really the ability to differentiate testifiable speech from untestifiable speech. In other words, I've taken what is how the sciences regulate speech to the law, and that means that we could extend the warranty on commercial speech into the university. In other words, you couldn't teach false things in university anymore because you'd be liable.
Yes.
For it the same way that the guy who sells you any other fraud is liable.
Yes.
So that would immediately wipe out the pseudosciences.
Oh, absolutely. That is so powerful. So just to give the audience another example, if Chevy Motor Company puts out cars with faulty brakes because they did not do their due diligence to make sure those brakes are safe, and then people start dying, you can sue Chevy. Right. But right now, our academy is teaching our young people pseudoscience lies, and they're not being punished for it. Well, under Kurt's system, they can be sued, they can be liable for speaking falsehoods, and we're not talking about some person with all power sitting somewhere arbitrarily determining what's true.
No, it's just you. You just go there and sue them.
Exactly. But there's falsehood tests. What the person says has to pass certain empirical falsehood tests. You go line by line, and these falsehood tests are very hard to argue with. And so if you're blatantly lying by omission.
It's a checklist that works in court, and it's hard for you to believe the courts do this all the time, right? Yes. This is just a better checklist for truthful speech. It doesn't say it's true. You can still be wrong, right? But it says you can warranty that you're not speaking falsely, right?
Yes. Yep. And it's just restoring power to the people to basically make sure that your public figures are not hurting you or hurting the polity by lying.
Right. So this would mean that your politicians couldn't lie to you, your financial people, your banks couldn't lie to you. The same. What else it would do is, like, we can't go and sue a corporation for pollution right now. The government has to act because the government has disintermediated itself. Well, that wouldn't be possible anymore. Yes. We could put together. I mean, it would institutionalize the class action suits, not in matters of the private common. In other words, right now we can put class action suits, which is we all give up our right to individual lawsuit to back another one, and then we all this thing goes to the system. And the fact that there's so many of us in this category, well, we would restore the via negativa market for the suppression of parasitism at all levels. But it would mean that it would have suppressed at the commercial level, the academic level, the information system. In other words, you could sue you could sue people in the news media for telling you a falsehood.
Yes.
Now, what happens the minute those news media are accountable for everything they say, right? There's no more of this nonsense.
Yes, it's done.
It's done. Is the minute you're accountable for what you say, you have to warranty your due diligence, right? It's not an internal test. It's a legal test. We can take you to court. Did you warranty your due diligence? Did you load and frame this statement, or is it? So in other words, have you tried to mislead somebody with it? And so basically, you're going to take all the drama out of our civilization. But you do the same thing with a politician. Right now, what's his name? I love this guy, Andrew Yang. He's freaking hysterical. I mean, it's like they were laughing. I didn't listen to the whole thing, but they were laughing at him last night when he was talking about giving everybody $1,000. This is it's not legal, and it's not constitutional, and it's not possible, right? It doesn't mean he can't sell it, right? Yeah. Well, I mean, if you even said that, it'd be legal. You'd be prosecutable.
Yes. Yes.
Right. And so you could do, for example, Medicare, healthcare for everyone. You can do that as long as you set it up as an exchange. What are you trading for it? You could do that, right? But you can't just go out and say we're going to take from the middle class, or lie that you're going to take from the middle class, because you know who's going to pay it? The same people who are not breeding today because they're already overtaxed.
Yeah. Yep. I think this is a serious candidate for best idea ever. I mean, when you describe that about the mainstream media would not be able to do what they do. It would have to be very, very just basic reporting on the facts. They would not be able to do all of this narrative telling that they do, false narrative. The universities that are teaching pseudoscience and lies would be gutted. That whole part of it would be gutted. We'd have peace in our society. Because
we would have people who had only one choice. They could actually pursue mutually beneficial trades. Right now, the right wants to trade anything to get education out of control of the left. Right? They've proposed a dozen things. The right is always proposing these trades, but the left doesn't want, because what they see is they can immigrate enough people that they can use majoritarian mob rule in order to get a hold of it.
Yeah.
Which I keep telling them, all you're going to do is destroy democracy, because we're not going to let it happen.
Correct. Yep.
I mean, what's happening now is there's not going to be democracy anymore. Not going to be majoritarian democracy.
Yes.
There's going to be something else. Now, I have a solution which devolves it. The other solution is we just eliminate it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's either going to be a very big war where a lot of people die, or ideally something like you're talking about, and this is what I like about your solution too, is it's actually, you can have a huge war where just a ton of people die and it's like just total chaos and everything's terrible. Or you can have, maybe after some conflict, after the left gets the point we're not going to be able to win this, you can have some kind of, what I think of your solution is actually kind of a gentle transition as far as the solution itself, because it utilizes a lot of this infrastructure that we already have at the state level, the local level.
It's just possible. It's
possible to do. And I look at it, I say, this could be done. This is not impossible.
No, we have the structures in place today. All you're talking about really doing is moving the moving the choice of expenditure on commons out of the federal government, the discretionary funding. Yes. Right now, there's military, non-discretionary funding, and discretionary. About a third of our money is discretionary. I'm take that discretionary funding, give it back to the states. Keep the social service programs, because nobody's going to want to give those up. Or if they are, they're going to reduce them back to the states. And fine, reduce that back to the states. Right? Then you have the military. Well, the military is going to be there, although the question is whether we're going to have a blue water military that controls trade, or we're going to have a continental military. I think that's a discussion between us and Europe. I don't think that's a domestic discussion, because I think Europe has to have our military, and I think that there's certain reasons our people, in other words, white Christian Europeans, want to maintain that military.
Yes,
because it's basically the center of our ancestral tradition. Yeah. So I want to maintain that. I just want to restore the military to pre Clinton era. Clinton turned it to a social subsidy market. I mean, the argument back then was, basically the military is a redistribution unit for the white middle class, working and middle class. But yeah, it is, and that's not a bad thing. Right now it's a question of we have to restore it to being a Western military if we're going to maintain Western civilization.
Yes. Yeah, this is great stuff. I love this because it gives me a vision, and hopefully it gives the audience a vision of, what we've got is a big mess on our hands right now, and a lot of people's mindset.
We got an empire. We got an empire, and we got a government that we're having the same problem the Romans did. I could go back and say, it's two things I have. The Romans could have said, we're going to keep the strong federal government. We're going to devolve it to these regions, and we're going to police the hell out of them. The problem the Romans had is they didn't have communication that we have today. The same for the British Empire. If we had communication we had it, we would have never had the problem of the British complaining about having the colonies having a house of government. Well, the reason is because it took too fucking long to get message A. So, it was 8 weeks across and 8 weeks back, and, it just makes government impossible. Yeah. Well, we don't live in a world where we're restoring the British Empire, which is probably the combination of the American and, uniting our militaries, right? And all having a house, a central house of negotiation, either in London or Canada or somewhere else, and we could restore the British Empire in a heartbeat and make China look sad. there wouldn't be any problem in it, and we could all keep, as long as we can keep our local policies local. I mean, there's value in having collective negotiation on trade and collective in defense. That's the ultimate good, but it's the only good of scale.
Yes.
People forget that the reasons we have big states today is because it was just the only way to finance militaries. And so the reason we had the United States in the first place was because it was the only way to finance militaries.
So we can still finance our military at scale, but then evolve basically everything else except maybe the financial aspect down.
Well, you have to have insurance. Insurance benefits from scale. So there's no reason we all don't pay. It's like insurance companies. The whole trick of insurance is, there's a lot of value in. It's a little stupid for us to let people settle Louisiana. The borders of the river down there where it's going to flood. I mean, if you shouldn't be able to enter into hazards. Why people build? We let people insure people who build houses in the freaking Bahamas beyond. Right. So if you want to be in a high risk area, then you can't insure. But otherwise, what does the government do? The primary function of government is to use scale as an insurer of last resort. What do you think the military is? It's an insurer of last resort. What's the Treasury? What's an insurer of last resort? What do we use the social programs for? They're insurers of last resort. They're not mainstream. They're just via negativa for the things that fail. So the government there's value at scale, but there's no value at scale of social policy because you just deprive people of the ability to enter into competitions for experimenting with and producing commons that are most suitable to the demographics that they have.
Yep.
It's just insane. I said, I'll tell you how to fix. I know how to fix black urban youth education. I mean, the problem is it's not legal for me to do. The law won't let me set up a school for that. Right? Yeah. There's millions of people know how to. How many guys who are successful in life want to give back by going back and teaching, and they can't? Well, I mean, who do we want teaching our kids?
Those guys.
That.
Yes.
Right. So, I would teach, if I could teach high school, especially, law or economics, I'd do it just because I do it for free.
To give back.
Yeah. Just to give back.
Yep.
Just because once you're successful, people forget that there's a lot of successful people. I mean, it's absurd how many millionaires we have. A lot of successful people, they haven't got a way to give back anymore. It used to be in Athens, it was like your job. If you've been successful, you're in government now. Sorry.
What we have has provided a way for you to become successful. It's been part of your success, so now you're going to give back.
Or it's just easier to say, dude, I did it. It doesn't work that way. It works like this, right? Who do you want to listen to?
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, and I see these guys, and it's just we have. I mean, I appreciate people who want to teach, right? But honestly, let's get better people. I mean, look, I keep looking at Finland. I look at Finland. I look at how the Soviets taught. I look at Finland, how they taught, and I'm like, we do the absolute worst possible combination because we think everybody's special. We're all freaking animals, and we need Schutzhund training, and we just need it differently.
Yeah. Well, this is great, folks. I don't know if you can tell through this conversation, but this is why one of the things that I've started saying, and that our community and the Propertarian community has begun saying, is we can get over the hump of where we're at in Western civilization. There's going to be some type of conflict, some type of separation. And when we do that, we can build a new renaissance because we know what to do. We understand these things now. You've gained a lot of that understanding through just listening to Kurt talk. We know what to do. We know how to design things so that, for example, we have the scale for the aspects that need scale, and we have the localization for the aspects that need the localization. We know how to make people happy, and what we have to do is just get past the people who don't want us to do that, but we have the ability to do it, as I've talked about in other videos. But there's going to be a new renaissance because we have this knowledge now, and we have the ability through the internet. I know, obviously, Kurt has probably learned a lot of what he's learned just because of quick access to information through the internet. We have the ability in this generation to produce solutions that no other previous generation generation had. And we have the benefit of all the mistakes of the 20th century that we've watched happen. We understand why those mistakes happened. We have innovations in rule of law that propertarianism gives us, shutting down the lying, as we've been talking about, making sure mechanisms to make sure that the judiciary is just enforcing reciprocity and nothing else, mechanisms to make sure our representatives are not violating reciprocity. That's why I say we know what to do. At least we have a much, much better idea what to do now than we had in any previous generation. And so that's where I think, Kurt, your work is so valuable. Do you have anything to add on that aspect as far as we have the opportunity to build a much
I want to put it in real terms. You know what happened? By the High Middle Ages, the church had ended up controlling 50% of the land in Europe. And what was it producing? It wasn't. It was just holding a priesthood that was pretty corrupt, honestly. Now, the church doesn't like us talking about that, but the Catholic Church makes the Russians and the Chinese look like kindly little grandmothers. And so what happened, though, is that we got literacy in the Protestant Revolution, and starting with Henry V, the capital, the 50% of the capital in Europe was dead in the church. It wasn't moving. It was rent. It was just a means of rent seeking, parasitically preying off of people kept ignorant by the church. What happened when that reversed? What happened when that capital was let loose? It was no longer concentrated. Now look at America. How much dead capital is stuck in Washington, D.C.? Now look at how many states could innovate. Now think about this. Think about the VC community in San Francisco.
Venture capital, yes.
The venture capital. Think of them as a monarchy, because that's really how they run the place. The state is like the church. It keeps the peasantry happy. And the financial community runs like a monarchy.
Yes.
Right? It just invests for returns. Right? Well, why isn't that the model? In other words, why aren't our states in that model? Instead of having the federal government being a rent-seeking magnet, why don't we just put this stuff all back in the regions and do to this Renaissance what the last Renaissance did, which is free up capital, so that this capital can be put to use with people all over the place in a competition rather than these monopolies.
Yes.
Why don't we empower people by eliminating the power distance?
Yes.
And so that's what I want to see happen. And so I know there's going to be a new Renaissance because I know what happened every other time.
Yeah,
right?
That's powerful.
So it's happened. There's no way to do it. Look what happened with the German princedoms, just in them competing against each other. Now look at how Switzerland does. I mean, Switzerland's the best place to live in the world, honestly, because it's small.
Yes. It's
small. Well, small, Protestant and Germanic, but it's small.
Yes.
Look at the Netherlands. It's small, right? What would happen if you took the world's 15 million Jews and you put them in Israel? You'd have the same population and territory as the Netherlands, right? And you'd have what are the top economies in the world? It's the same thing when you take any group of people and you empower them in other words, you decrease power distance and you increase opportunity for them to exercise it.
Yes.
And so I think people would, I know what's happened in the past. People will just do what's in their interest.
Yes.
We'll have a lot of Switzerlands,
yes.
And then you'll have people who are rent seekers move to these cities because the cities produce, because they have lower opportunity costs, right? They have a higher productivity. In other words, every time you double something, you get 20% more. In other words, if you double population, you get 20% better profitability. If you double it again, you get 20% better profitability.
Okay.
And so this power law always happens. So they can afford rent seekers. But the middle class America, we don't need rent seekers. We don't want to rent. We basically can produce our own commons, and we get the benefit of the commons in aesthetic and social forms.
Yes.
Right? And that's what we want to do. Now, our people can't express it like I can. That's why I'm trying to give them this language.
Yeah.
But I know what our people want. We want to be able to produce decent, high-quality fairy tale communities because we know how to do that.
Yep.
We've been doing it for 1,000 years now.
Yes.
So we want to go back to producing our fairy tale middle class communities, but we can't do that with rent seekers.
Yes.
So the high and the low want to produce their world, and the middle wants to produce our world. Mm-hmm. And that's what we would need to be able to do. We need to express our interests, and we need to divide into those kind of places that do. And what will happen is capital will reallocate us where we want it to.
Yes. Getting rid of these kind of stagnant pools of capital that are just sitting there in the form of rent seeking, fixing the financial aspect where money isn't coming into existence the way it does now, where it's basically just a big debt slavery factory. And
well, that's okay. You got to understand, a city is a genetic sink, right?
Yes.
People go there to kill ovaries, right? It's the cities where ovaries die, right? Let them go there. What's going to happen over 6 generations? They'll be gone.
Yep.
Right? So let's go and take our people, and we just have 6 generations of no longer having to pay for rent seekers.
Yes.
Instead, building families and commons. And in 6 generations, we'll be back we'll be back as 15% of the population.
Yep.
But you can't if you keep financing rent seekers and parasites by not reproducing, you're just committing suicide and genocide. So how can we stop our suicide and genocide? How can we persist our people? It's very easy. We can either separate peacefully and do what I'm recommending and have the benefits, or honestly, we can win. And it takes about 1% of us to win. It's probably less than that because we don't have the same issues we had in the past. I know I can play. I mean, I'm confident in now that I'm healthy enough again, I'm confident enough in my abilities that I'm happy to be the guy that runs around and plays Chairman Mao. Right? I'll do it. I mean, that was the last thing on earth I feel like doing. I feel I prefer to sit in cafes and write philosophy. But if I've got to run around with a bunch of other guys and raise a rural army to make sure that this happens by force, what happens when that starts? See, that's what everybody in the government and the left knows, is the minute we start that ball rolling, they're done.
Exactly.
Why? Because it's this entire European, American civilization, our entire empire is predicated on a rate of velocity of this hamster wheel we're on.
Yes.
And the minute you do things like you slow that down, I mean, look what happened with the Beltway sniper alone to D.C. It froze. It cost $50 billion of loss in just a few days.
That's one guy.
It's it's 2 guys in that case. One guy to drive the car and one guy in the back shooting the hole. But I mean, I'm not saying I would use that technique, but the point is that disruption in the ability of people to conduct commerce,
yes,
just to go to work,
yes,
it has catastrophic impulses. Now, it's one thing when there's a tornado or a hurricane like we had with Katrina, and you can pull resources from the whole country. Yeah. But what happens if there's happening in the whole country? You can't pull resources. What happens if people can't communicate in that country?
Yeah.
So it's very easy for us to win, and it's very easy for those urban cesspools that live by redistribution to be turned into camps, so to speak, where people are suffering on scales not seen before, not seen since the destruction of the Carthage, right? But it can happen, and so everybody knows that will happen. Everybody knows that it just takes 10,000 of us to start the ball rolling. So my view is that's why I talk about it. I want people to understand this is not hard for us to do. And we're getting to the point where it's preferable to do that than let you win. So let's compromise. Let's have a peaceful, orderly continuation of the big sort where we devolve the federal government from into an insurer of last resort instead of a market for the sale and distribution of a conquered continent.
Yep. And this is so important for people to understand. This is why I'm so, I cannot sell something that I am not 100% sold on. I'm just terrible at it. I've tried to do it before, and I always just think, the competition's product is better or whatever. I can't do it. But this I can sell all day long, and it's so important because the grassroots right wing knows that there's a lot of problems. We feel the walls closing in around us. So we have to understand, number one, we can win, but even just as importantly, once we get free of the parasites, we know what to do now so that this doesn't just keep repeating itself every however often, or at least drastically reduce the risk of that. And so all of these things that Kurt has been talking about, that I talk about in my other videos where I give you kind of the 101 version of propertarianism, it gives us a vision for the future so that we can say, this is actually the light at the end of the tunnel. We can do something that is much, much better. We're not just fighting with no vision at the end of the tunnel. So that's why I think this is so important.
So, thank you, John. God, you're so good. I mean, I wish I could do what you do.
Well, I appreciate that. I just love listening to you talk, Kurt. I mean, I would encourage people, if you just search Kurt Doolittle on YouTube, you will find other interviews with him as well, and you'll just learn so much just from listening to him. I've learned a lot today as well, Kurt. Any other things that are on your mind? I think that's a pretty good place to stop it for now, but any other things on your mind that you would want to share before we go?
Okay, so you said, I want to put in, people are better when they understand the cycles that things have happened before.
Yes.
So, and again, I'm going to say we Germanicized Christianity and turned it into a moral folk religion. Mm-hmm. And so I'm not, but it was at a tremendous cost. In other words, we went through 1,000 years of suffering to do that. Mm. And so but I've got to go back and say what happened in the old world. The Romans did not do what I'm saying to do. And that's why Rome fell. The Roman people were optimistic. They had faith in people. They had faith in the institutions. And they didn't. They failed. Mm. What if they were right to suppress Christianity, Judaism, and Islam? It's not because they were religions. It's because they were lies. And so those lies taught people to destroy civilization by lying.
Lies used to undermine.
Exactly. They undermine. What's been happening is a repeat of the exact same strategy the Jews, the Christian Jews, and the Muslims used to undermine our civilization in the ancient world. Cause us 1,000-year dark age, one that we didn't really get institutionally recover until Napoleon. Wow. In other words, it took us almost the better part of 2,000 years. We didn't get intellectually back until the 1920s.
Wow!
And it took us to the 1920s to catch up to the Romans.
Wow!
Right. So we lost almost 2,000 years to the last time somebody came around and undermined with false promise, sophism, and supernaturalism.
What the left is doing today. Yeah.
What they're doing today. They're just doing the Marxists are using the Jewish model. The postmodernists are using the Christian model, and the Muslims are repeating their model. But unless you understand that this worked, they took the written word and the availability, the Roman roads and the availability of the pulpit to distribute by trade routes in that era's form of mass media preaching, and they destroyed the ancient world through undermining. Every great civilization of the ancient world was destroyed genetically, culturally, institutionally, and informationally, and reduced to long-term poverty. The Egyptians were destroyed. The Berbers, I'm not supposed to use that word, because it actually is an insult to them. The North Africans were destroyed. The Persians, our cousins, the Persians, were destroyed. Right? The Europeans were destroyed. The Byzantines were destroyed. The previous civilizations that used to be Mesopotamia, which are now Iraq and Iran, which is Iraq, it's completely destroyed. They even drove the people from the Indus. India started in Pakistan. What's Pakistan and Afghanistan? That's where the Indus River is. They drove those people out and destroyed them. They destroyed it and moved them into India, it's the Indian subcontinent. Those destroyed everything. It took us and took Europeans, the rediscovery of Aristotle, the British system of law, because we still had enough pagan law, enough pagan tradition, enough Indo-European law left in the North Sea that we could use it with Aristotelian reason again and and restore our civilization.
So, Kurt, just to clarify for the audience, what these ancient people were doing to undermine and destroy the civilization was it basically underclass that was saying, don't leave us behind because reason leaves us behind.
That's right. And so what you have to do is you have a choice. You can either educate your underclass to conform, which is what we used to do, and you can make sure that you control the reproduction of underclass, which we did through soft manorialism. We also did it through hanging 1% of the population. Imagine if we hung 1 in 100 people every year,
like we used to.
Like we used to,
yeah.
If we hung 1% of the population, and it took those criminals, we hung 1%. Do you know how fast it would be corrected? If we instead of paying people to reproduce, we paid them to be sterilized or not reproduce, what would happen? We'd restore where we are. But right now, we're in an era where we've taken all this innovation in European technology. Because we did it. Remember, before the fall of the Roman Empire, we were very close to the Industrial Revolution. The Antikythera device is evidence that we were there. We could have had the Industrial Revolution within 100 years.
2,000 years earlier than we did. 200,000
years. We went through the plagues, the Dark Ages. We went through the Muslim conquests. We went through the destruction of the ancient world, the 5 great civilizations in the ancient world. We went through all of that because we didn't oppress the people who lied. So I want to do the same thing. I want to learn from that mistake. They used the availability of mass media and the slowness of the adoption of our law they used our Christian forgiveness because we believed that they would adapt to us. They didn't. They sought again to destroy us, just like they're doing today.
Yep.
And so I want to do what the Romans failed to do, one way or the other. We'll either do it with our law and stop the lying,
yes,
or we'll do it by warfare and stop the people. Now, that's not a nice answer, but we're going to do one or the other.
Yep.
Because I am, and I know there's at least 20 million guys like me willing to do something about it.
Yep. That's beautiful, Kurt. I think that's very important context for the audience to understand that this is not a new thing that is happening to us.
It's just a repeat. People don't understand. Dark Ages are cyclical. This one was longer. This one was a lot longer. Usually there's 600 years. But the Muslim destruction of trade, civilization, was greater than the Sea People's destruction, which was greater than whatever happened there at the end of the Stone Age. I don't know. But something happened there. We had a very long Dark Age, longer than the last one.
So let's not make the mistake that the Romans made.
Let's not make. I mean, are you going to doom them to the destruction of our civilization under a cancer like Islam? Are you going to let the predation of our people under a usury during the Middle Ages and corruption under the church in the Middle Ages? Are you going to let them return to the despotism of the state? Or are you going to say that we had it right in the ancient world, in Greece and Rome? We had it right up until the 20th century. As a matter of fact, I don't think it can get better than the British Empire. Except maybe we don't want to do that poor things to the Indians. We don't want to let the British Empire repeat its commercial, its violation of reciprocity.
Sure.
But there's no reason we have to turn to the mob rule, ignorance, despotism, because everybody's afraid of someone getting ahead.
Yeah.
Let's instead get everybody ahead.
Yes. And I don't know if this is coming through the microphone at all for the audience, but I've had some major thunder going on here as you've been talking for the last few minutes, Kurt. So it's actually kind of giving me goosebumps listening to you say the things.
I'm telling you, God's on my side. I'm on God's side.
That's right.
He said, I know his name. I know his name is Jehovah. I know his name is Dios Paita.
Well, that's what I tell Christians too is, you look at Romans 8, it says the job of government is to punish evil, right? So I just say, listen, Kurt is like Steve Jobs. I mean, you use a smartphone every day. Steve Jobs was not a Christian. He was actually kind of a jerk, but he was a genius. But he was a genius. So you use your smartphone every day and you don't complain about it. You've heard Kurt talk about Christianity today. He's a genius. He's figuring out a way to do what the Bible says the government should do, which is punish evil. He's figuring out a way to do it better. He's giving us some very concrete vision for ensuring that we don't enter another dark age. And I think it's extremely, extremely valuable. So, Kurt, thank you so much for being with me today. Maybe we'll have to do this again sometime. Maybe do a live Q&A or something. But it's been an absolute pleasure. I've learned a lot listening to you today. I know the audience has as well. So thank you for what you're doing. Thank you for all your hard work.
And really, thanks for all you do. I mean, I was the difference you have made by making my rather autistic, analytic, really unnormal speech available to people is something I think the world should appreciate.
Oh, good. I'm really thrilled that I have been able to, make a difference for something that's so valuable. And it's just a good way to close as well. Just to remind people, if you have not already watched my videos on Propertarianism, I have a video called Intro to Propertarianism. I have a video called Propertarian Policies that'll give you a little bit more detail on some of the policies. And then if you just want to go to propertarianism.com, once you start learning some of the terminology, if you just go to propertarianism.com and use the search bar to search certain terms and just read, you will learn so much. And again, I would encourage people to also support the Propertarian Institute on Patreon. You can just search for the Propertarian Institute. And again, thank you so much for being here. Kurt, anything else you'd like to add before we close? Or
no, I love you all. I mean, I am motivated by love for not only my people, but all people. But the only way to love each other is to let each other be free.
Great stuff. Well, thank you, Kurt. We'll talk to you soon.
Take care, brother.
All right. Bye-bye.